The roots of comparison. Human beings are storytellers by nature. Since the beginning of civilization, we have survived, grown, and connected by telling stories about who we are, where we stand, and how we measure up. Embedded in those stories is a constant question. Am I doing better or worse than the people around me? This question has been both a source of progress and a source of pain. To understand why comparing ourselves to others has become such a deeply ingrained part of life, we need to go back to the roots, to psychology, culture, and the social structures that shape us. The evolutionary instinct. From an evolutionary standpoint, comparison was not just natural, it was essential. Our ancestors lived in small tribes where survival often depended on knowing your place in the group. Who was the strongest hunter? Who had the sharpest eyes? Who had the most knowledge of plants or weather patterns? Comparison was a way of evaluating who could lead, who could protect, and who could provide. In those days, this instinct had a clear purpose: it ensured survival. If a young hunter compared himself to the older, more experienced ones, he knew what skills to practice and what behaviors would earn him respect. If a gatherer noticed that someone else had more effective techniques for finding fruit, she could learn and improve. In this context, comparison functioned like a compass, guiding people toward growth. But as societies became more complex, and especially as we moved from survival-driven communities into modern, industrialized life, that compass became distorted. The instinct to compare did not disappear, it only expanded, attaching itself to areas of life where it often does more harm than good. The social fabric of modern life. In today's world, comparison is less about survival and more about identity. We don't compare our ability to track animals or start fires. Instead, we compare careers, salaries, appearances, lifestyles, and even levels of happiness. The tribes we now belong to are not just our families or neighborhoods, they are our workplaces, schools, online communities, and the vast digital stage of social media. The problem is that these modern tribes are far larger and more interconnected than anything our brains were designed to handle. A person living in a small village centuries ago might compare themselves to 50 or 100 people. Today, with the swipe of a finger, we can compare ourselves to millions. Instagram shows us the highlight reels of celebrities, entrepreneurs, influencers, and even our high school classmates who seem to be living the dream. LinkedIn bombards us with promotions, awards, and career milestones. YouTube is filled with people who make success look effortless. When comparison becomes this endless, global competition, it stops being useful feedback and starts becoming a heavy chain. Instead of motivating us to grow, it leaves us feeling inadequate, no matter how much we achieve. The psychology behind comparison. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon for decades, and one of the most famous concepts is called social comparison theory. Proposed by Leon Festinger in 1954, the theory suggests that people determine their own worth by comparing themselves to others. We constantly seek benchmarks outside ourselves to understand if we're doing well enough. There are two main types of social comparison. Upward comparison. When we compare ourselves to those who we believe are better off. This can inspire us, but more often it discourages us. Looking at someone else's success can make us feel small, incompetent, or hopeless. Downward comparison. When we compare ourselves to those who are worse off. This can give us a temporary boost of confidence, but it often leads to arrogance or complacency. Both forms of comparison can be dangerous when they dominate our thinking. Upward comparison can trap us in envy, while downward comparison can disconnect us from empathy. The balance is delicate, and without awareness, most of us slide unconsciously into the darker sides of both. Cultural forces that reinforce comparison. In America, the culture of individualism and achievement magnifies comparison. From childhood, kids are graded, ranked, and measured against their peers. Sports, academics, extracurricular activities, nearly every arena is designed to produce winners and losers. By the time those kids grow into adults, they have internalized the idea that life itself is a scoreboard. The American dream, powerful as it is, also carries this weight. It tells us that success is available to everyone, but it quietly suggests that if you don't make it, you must have done something wrong. In a culture that idolizes self-made billionaires and overnight success stories, It's almost impossible not to look at your own life and wonder if you're falling short. And then came social media, which turned comparison into a 24/7 experience. Before, people only compared themselves to neighbors or coworkers. Now, comparison has no boundaries. We can compare our breakfast to a food blogger's curated plate, our body to a fitness influencer's sculpted abs, our paycheck to a tech entrepreneur's millions, our vacations to an Instagram travel guru's exotic adventures. The line between reality and performance has blurred. Yet our emotions react as if every image is real and every success is authentic. The thin line between growth and despair. To be clear, comparison is not inherently bad. Sometimes it pushes us toward improvement. Watching a peer succeed can light a fire inside us, reminding us of what's possible. Friendly competition can drive innovation, creativity, and achievement. That's why comparison is tricky. It has both a bright side and a shadow side. The problem arises when comparison shifts from being a tool to being a trap. When every scroll through social media makes us feel smaller. When we start believing our worth is only as good as our last achievement. When other people's lives stop being sources of inspiration and start being sources of despair. This is the root issue. We have allowed comparison to leave its original role, a survival mechanism and a motivator for growth, and turn into a thief of joy. Planting a new root, turning inward. The first step in breaking free from destructive comparison is understanding these roots. Realizing that this instinct is ancient and hardwired, but also realizing that the modern world has supercharged it beyond healthy limits. Once we see the forces at play, evolutionary, psychological, cultural, we can begin to question them. What if, instead of asking, "Am I doing better than them?" we asked, "Am I doing better than I did yesterday?" What if the only scoreboard we played on was our own? What if success wasn't measured by outshining others, but by growing in ways that matter personally, in kindness, in skill, in resilience, in authenticity? The roots of comparison will always be there. But like a tree, we can choose where to let those roots grow, into soil that nourishes growth, or into soil that breeds envy. That choice, more than any external measure, determines whether comparison will make us stronger or break us down. The consequences of comparison. If the roots of comparison are ancient and unavoidable, the consequences in modern life are sharper and more damaging than ever. While a little bit of comparison can push us to grow, unchecked comparison can slowly eat away at our confidence, our relationships, and even our sense of self. It's like drinking poison in small doses. It doesn't kill you instantly, but over time, it weakens you until you hardly recognize yourself. In this section, let's take a closer look at what happens when comparison stops being a motivator and starts being a prison. 1. The silent erosion of self-esteem. Perhaps the most immediate consequence of constant comparison is the erosion of self-esteem. Every time we measure ourselves against someone else's success, we risk concluding that we're not enough. Think about the last time you scrolled through Instagram and saw someone traveling through Europe, smiling effortlessly in front of the Eiffel Tower, or celebrating their new promotion on LinkedIn. Without even realizing it, your brain starts calculating. Why am I not there? Why don't I have that? What's wrong with me? The danger here isn't that you notice differences. Noticing is natural. The danger is when those differences turn into judgments against yourself. Instead of appreciating your own journey, you shrink under the weight of someone else's highlight reel. Over time, this can lead to feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, and even depression. It's no coincidence that the rise of social media has coincided with a rise in reported mental health struggles, especially among young people. The constant exposure to curated perfection creates a world where everyone feels behind. 2. The trap of envy and resentment. Another consequence of comparison is envy, a feeling that can quickly morph into bitterness. Envy isn't just wanting what someone else has, it's resenting them for having it. It's looking at a coworker's success and secretly hoping they stumble. It's watching a friend get engaged and feeling a pit of anger instead of joy. Envy corrodes relationships. It makes it hard to celebrate others sincerely. And it isolates us from people we care about. What should be a source of connection, sharing joys and milestones, becomes a source of silent competition. But envy doesn't just hurt relationships, it hurts us, too. When we live in envy, we constantly feel cheated by life, as if we've been shortchanged by fate. That bitterness seeps into everything, turning even our own accomplishments into hollow victories. 3. Paralysis and fear of action. Surprisingly, comparison doesn't always push us to do more. Sometimes it paralyzes us into doing nothing at all. When we see others excelling, our own goals can suddenly feel out of reach. A college student might watch a classmate ace every exam and think, "I'll never be that smart," and stop studying altogether. An aspiring writer might read a best-selling novel and conclude, "I could never write like that," and abandon their draft. An entrepreneur might see a competitor's booming success and decide, "Why even try?" This paralysis is one of the most tragic consequences of comparison, because it robs us of the chance to even try. Instead of moving forward imperfectly, we freeze in the shadow of someone else's perceived perfection. 4. Burnout from the endless race. For others, comparison doesn't cause paralysis but overdrive. When you feel like you're always behind, you push yourself harder and harder to catch up. You take on more work, chase more achievements, and stretch yourself thin in the attempt to close the gap. But here's the cruel twist: the finish line keeps moving. No matter how much you accomplish, there's always someone doing more, faster, better. It's like running on a treadmill that never stops accelerating. The result is exhaustion, burnout, and sometimes even physical illness. This is why so many high achievers, people who look like they have it all, quietly suffer behind the scenes. They are caught in a race that never ends, driven not by passion but by the fear of falling behind. 5. The distortion of reality. Another hidden consequence of comparison is the distortion of reality itself. When we compare, we rarely see the whole picture. We see the surface of someone else's life, the polished exterior, and compare it to the messy backstage of our own. That friend who always looks put together might cry themselves to sleep at night. That colleague who just bought a new house might be drowning in debt. That influencer who seems endlessly happy might be struggling with loneliness. But our brains don't register those possibilities. We take the illusion as truth, and then measure ourselves against it. The result is living in a constant state of inferiority against standards that aren't even real. 6. Lost joy in our own lives. Perhaps the saddest consequence of comparison is the way it robs us of joy. When we are always focused on what others have, we stop noticing what's right in front of us. Think about a birthday party where instead of enjoying your own cake and friends, you're scrolling online, envying someone else's bigger party. Or imagine landing a new job, but instead of celebrating, you compare your salary to someone else's and feel disappointed. Joy cannot survive in an environment of constant comparison. Gratitude cannot thrive when it is smothered by envy. The very things that make life beautiful, love, friendship, growth, small victories, get overshadowed by the obsession with measuring up. 7. Real-world illustrations. We don't have to look far for examples of how destructive comparison can be. In school, students often give up subjects they love because they can't match the top student's performance. Instead of finding joy in learning, they feel defeated by grades. In careers, professionals burn out chasing promotions because everyone else seems to be climbing faster. They forget why they entered the field in the first place. In art, musicians, painters, and writers abandon their passions because they feel overshadowed by more talented peers. They rob the world of their unique voice. One story that illustrates this well is the rise of social media influencers. For every influencer who seems to be thriving, there are thousands of young people measuring their self-worth against likes and followers, feeling invisible if they don't go viral. 8. The mental and physical toll. The consequences of comparison aren't just emotional, they're physical. Chronic stress from feeling inadequate can trigger insomnia, headaches, high blood pressure, and weakened immunity. Mental health struggles like anxiety and depression often stem from, or are worsened by, constant comparison. Research has shown that heavy social media users report lower levels of life satisfaction, largely due to comparison. The brain interprets others' curated happiness as a threat to our status, activating the same stress responses that once kept us alive in the wild. Except now, those stress hormones are not saving us from predators, they're slowly breaking us down. Closing thought. The price we pay. The consequences of comparison are not abstract, they are deeply personal and painfully real. They touch how we see ourselves, how we treat others, how we spend our days, and how we experience our own lives. When we constantly compare, we pay a heavy price: our peace of mind, our health, our relationships, and our joy. What started as a survival instinct has turned into a thief of happiness. The good news is that recognizing these consequences is the first step to change. Once we see the cost of comparison, we can begin to ask ourselves whether we're willing to keep paying it, or whether it's time to live by a different measure. Stories and case studies of comparison. Stories are powerful because they put flesh and blood on abstract ideas. We can talk about comparison in theory all day long, but it's when we step into real lives, into successes, failures, triumphs, and breakdowns, that the message hits home. In this section, let's walk through some stories, both from history and from ordinary life, that show how comparison can either destroy us or push us toward growth. Edison versus Tesla. A tale of two geniuses. Few rivalries illustrate the trap of comparison better than the one between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Edison, the American inventor, was celebrated as a relentless worker and a savvy businessman. Tesla, the Serbian-born genius, was a visionary thinker with ideas decades ahead of his time. Both men contributed enormously to the world of electricity and innovation, but their lives unfolded in strikingly different ways. Edison built a fortune and secured a lasting reputation as one of America's greatest inventors. Tesla, despite his brilliance, died penniless and often felt overshadowed by Edison's fame. Now, the truth is more complicated than the myth. Tesla made critical mistakes, and Edison's methods were often ruthless, but the way history remembers them often centers on comparison. Was Tesla better than Edison? Was Edison greater because he was wealthier? Did Tesla's lack of financial success make him a failure? This is where comparison becomes dangerous. Instead of appreciating Tesla's unique contributions, wireless communication, alternating current, and visionary concepts that shaped the future, many people judge him through Edison's shadow. And that shadow, heavy as it was, haunted Tesla himself. His letters reveal frustration at being unrecognized. His genius often measured against Edison's practical achievements. The lesson here is sobering. Even geniuses can be trapped by comparison. Measuring ourselves against others doesn't just diminish our joy, it can distort how history remembers us. Michael Jordan, turning comparison into fuel. But comparison doesn't always end in despair. Sometimes, if handled wisely, it becomes fuel for growth. Take Michael Jordan, widely regarded as the greatest basketball player of all time. Early in his career, Jordan faced rejection. He didn't make his high school varsity basketball team on his first try. For many teenagers, that kind of setback would have led to comparison and defeat. He's better than me, I'll never make it. But Jordan turned comparison into motivation. Instead of sulking, he practiced harder than anyone else. He used the sting of rejection not as proof that he wasn't good enough, but as a challenge to outwork everyone. Over time, his discipline and hunger transformed him into a global icon. Jordan's story shows us that comparison isn't inherently toxic. It's the meaning we assign to it. We can let it paralyze us, or we can let it drive us to grow. The college student who gave up. Not every story has a happy twist. Though, I once knew a college student. Let's call her Emily, who loved writing. She filled journals with poems and short stories, and she dreamed of publishing a novel someday. But when she joined a creative writing class, she began comparing herself to another student whose work was polished, sophisticated, and clearly admired by the professor. Instead of feeling inspired, Emily felt crushed. She told herself, "I'll never write like that. My work is childish in comparison." By the end of the semester, Emily had stopped writing altogether. She handed in assignments reluctantly, no longer pouring her heart into the page. The joy that once animated her had withered under the weight of comparison. What breaks my heart about Emily's story is that the world will never know what she could have created. Comparison silenced her voice before it even had a chance to develop. And how many of us are like Emily, abandoning passions, projects, or dreams because we measure ourselves against someone else's chapter 20 while we're still on chapter 1? The social media spiral. Today, one of the most common arenas for destructive comparison is social media. Let's imagine a young man. We'll call him Jake. Jake has a decent job, supportive friends, and a comfortable life. But every night, he scrolls through Instagram and TikTok. He sees influencers vacationing in Bali, entrepreneurs flashing luxury cars, fitness gurus showing off six-packs, and classmates from college announcing engagements and promotions. Slowly, Jake begins to feel like his life is small and unimpressive. He doesn't see the hard work, the struggles, or the staged realities behind those posts. He only sees perfection, and against that backdrop, his reality feels gray. Within months, Jake is restless, dissatisfied, and anxious. He buys things he can't afford to keep up appearances. He avoids old friends because he feels ashamed of his ordinary life. His mental health begins to decline, not because his life is bad, but because he's measuring it against curated illusions. Jake's story is all too familiar. Studies show that heavy social media users often report lower levels of happiness, largely because of comparison. The digital world has become a factory of envy, producing discontent on an industrial scale. Everyday stories of comparison. We don't need to look at celebrities or historical figures to see the damage comparison causes. The young professional who constantly compares salaries with colleagues, never feeling satisfied with his own paycheck. The parent who measures their child's milestones against those of neighbors, leading to unnecessary pressure and guilt. The artist who abandons her craft because she can't match the success of others online. The retiree who feels too late because he compares his life achievements to those of peers who built businesses or traveled the world. Each of these people carries a unique story, but they all share the same chain around their neck, the weight of someone else's life. What these stories teach us. When we zoom out, these stories reveal a sobering truth. Comparison can kill joy, silence creativity, and distort reality, but they also show us something hopeful. That comparison, when reframed, can be turned into a source of strength. Tesla's story warns us of the dangers of living in another's shadow. Emily's story shows us the tragedy of silencing our own voice. Jake's story illustrates the toxic spiral of social media. But Michael Jordan's story reminds us that with the right mindset, comparison can light a fire instead of extinguishing one. The key difference is not whether we compare, because we all do, but how we interpret what comparison tells us. Do we let it say, "You're not enough?" Or do we let it say, "You can grow more"? Closing reflection. At its heart, comparison is a mirror, but it's a mirror that distorts unless we learn to adjust the angle. Look at it wrong, and you'll see a twisted reflection that convinces you you're inadequate. Look at it right, and you'll see a challenge, a guidepost pointing you toward growth. The stories we just explored show both sides of that mirror. They show us that the consequences of comparison are not set in stone. They depend on how we frame the story, and whether we choose to measure ourselves by someone else's yardstick, or by our own. Lessons and practical methods to overcome comparison. We've traced the roots of comparison. We've examined its heavy consequences. We've seen stories where it crushes dreams and stories where it fuels greatness. But knowledge alone isn't enough. If we want to live free from the chains of comparison, we need tools, practical ways to shift our mindset and daily practices that turn theory into habit. This section is about those tools. Think of it as a roadmap for transforming comparison from a destructive force into a stepping stone toward growth. Lesson 1. Redefine success. One of the biggest traps of comparison is adopting someone else's definition of success. If success means wealth, beauty, or recognition, things that are often beyond our full control, then we'll always find someone doing better. The first step is to ask, what does success mean to me? For some, it might be raising a healthy family. For others, it might be creating meaningful art, building a business, or simply living with peace of mind. When success is defined personally, comparison loses much of its power. Practical exercise. Write down 3 to 5 sentences that define success in your terms. Keep it specific, authentic, and unconnected to anyone else's achievements. Post it somewhere visible, on your bathroom mirror, your desk, or your phone background. Every time you feel yourself slipping into comparison, come back to this definition. Lesson 2. Compare with yourself, not others. This may sound cliché, but it's profoundly effective. The only fair comparison is between who you are today and who you were yesterday. Did you grow, even just a little? Did you handle a tough situation more gracefully than you would have a year ago? Did you learn something new, or show kindness when it wasn't easy? These are victories worth celebrating. They don't make headlines, but they shape character. Practical exercise. Keep a progress journal. At the end of each day, Jot down one way you improved or learned something new. It doesn't have to be monumental, even a small step forward counts. Over time, this journal becomes evidence of your growth, a living record of how far you've come. Lesson 3. Practice gratitude daily. Comparison thrives on scarcity, the belief that there's not enough success, love, beauty, or happiness to go around. Gratitude, on the other hand, thrives on abundance. When you regularly acknowledge what you already have, the grip of comparison begins to loosen. Practical exercise. Start a gratitude journal. Every morning or evening, write down 3 things you're grateful for. They don't need to be grand: a warm cup of coffee, a supportive friend, or the fact that I'm still learning. Gratitude shifts focus from what's missing to what's present. And over time, it rewires your brain to notice the good instead of the gaps. Lesson 4. Limit the triggers. If comparison is fueled by constant exposure, then reducing exposure is essential. Social media, while powerful in connecting us, is one of the biggest triggers for unhealthy comparison. Practical steps. Curate your feed. Unfollow or mute accounts that consistently make you feel inadequate. Set boundaries. Limit your scrolling to designated times instead of letting it invade your entire day. Add balance. Follow accounts that inspire growth without inducing envy, educators, positive communities, or creators who share authentically. It's not about deleting social media entirely, though that's an option for some. It's about reclaiming control over what you consume. Lesson 5. Celebrate others without losing yourself. It may sound counterintuitive, but one of the best ways to break free from toxic comparison is to practice celebrating others sincerely. When you learn to see someone else's success as proof of what's possible rather than proof of your inadequacy, comparison transforms. Practical exercise. The next time someone in your circle achieves something, pause. Notice the first instinct. Is it envy? Instead of feeding that feeling, intentionally offer genuine congratulations. Remind yourself, their win doesn't mean my loss. With practice, your default response shifts from jealousy to joy. Lesson 6. Shift focus to process, not outcome. Comparison often fixates on outcomes: the promotion, the award, the vacation, the perfect life snapshot. But real fulfillment comes from process, from the daily work, the learning, the small improvements. Practical exercise. When working toward a goal, keep a process tracker. Instead of only marking milestones like promotions or published work, track the habits, the hours practiced, the pages written, the workouts completed. This keeps your eyes on your lane, not on the scoreboard of others. Lesson 7. Cultivate mindfulness. Mindfulness is the art of being present without judgment. When you're mindful, you notice your thoughts without letting them control you. So when the thought arises, she's prettier than me, or he's more successful than I'll ever be, you can see it as just that, a thought, not a truth. Practical exercise. Try a simple mindfulness meditation. Sit quietly for 5 minutes. Focus on your breath, and when thoughts arise, label them gently: thinking, comparing, judging, then let them go. Over time, this practice builds mental space between you and your comparison-driven thoughts. Lesson 8. Build authentic community. Comparison thrives in isolation. When we only see others from a distance, through screens, through filtered images, through surface-level conversations, our minds fill in the gaps with unrealistic assumptions. But when we engage in authentic community, we realize everyone struggles. Practical step. Spend intentional time with people who are real, not just polished. Share your challenges openly and invite them to do the same. Vulnerability breaks the illusion of perfection and creates solidarity. When you know someone's backstory, their success becomes inspiring rather than threatening. Lesson 9. Accept imperfection as part of life. At the core of comparison is often perfectionism, the belief that if we just did enough, earned enough, or looked good enough, we'd finally measure up. But life is messy. Everyone is flawed. True peace comes not from outshining others but from embracing imperfection as part of the human condition. Practical mantra. Repeat to yourself, I am enough, even as I grow. Write it down, say it aloud, or put it somewhere you'll see daily. This isn't about settling, it's about grounding your worth in being, not in outperforming. The larger lesson: owning your story. The deepest lesson in all of this is about ownership. Comparison is, at its core, a distraction. It pulls our eyes off our own story and glues them to someone else's. The path out is reclaiming ownership of our narrative. Your story doesn't need to look like anyone else's. It doesn't need the same chapters, the same milestones, or the same timeline. The only measure that matters is whether you are becoming more fully yourself, not whether you are keeping up with someone else. Closing reflection. Breaking free from comparison isn't a one-time decision, it's a daily practice. Some days you'll scroll past someone's highlight reel and shrug it off. Other days, envy will creep in. The goal isn't to eliminate comparison completely, that's impossible. The goal is to transform it, to build habits and mindsets that keep you grounded in your own path. Redefine success. Compare only with yourself. Practice gratitude. Limit triggers. Celebrate others. Focus on process. Be mindful. Build community. Accept imperfection. Own your story. When you weave these practices into daily life, comparison loses its teeth. It stops being a chain and becomes, at most, a whisper, a background noise you can choose to ignore. And in that quiet space, you finally hear what matters most, your own voice, your own growth, your own joy. Why we ignore our health. There's an old saying that health is like money. You don't truly value it until it's gone. The irony is that most of us know this, at least on some level. And yet we continue to live as if our health is indestructible. We push our bodies beyond their limits, feed them poorly, deprive them of rest, and only pay attention when something breaks. Why do we treat the very foundation of our lives with such carelessness? The answer lies in a mix of psychology, culture, and the fast-paced modern world we've built for ourselves. The illusion of invincibility. When we're young, it feels like our bodies can take anything. We can pull all-nighters, eat junk food for days, or skip exercise without noticing any immediate effects. Our bodies bounce back quickly. And that resilience creates a dangerous illusion. I'll always be fine. This illusion of invincibility is especially strong in adolescence and early adulthood. Psychologists call it the personal fable, the belief that bad things happen to other people, not to us. Heart disease, diabetes, chronic pain, burnout, those sound like problems for an older generation. For now, we think we can get away with neglect. But the body keeps score. The small daily choices we make, what we eat, how we sleep, how stressed we let ourselves become, add up quietly in the background. By the time the consequences appear, years or decades later, the damage is often harder to reverse. The culture of hustle. Beyond personal psychology, culture plays a massive role in why we ignore health. In America, there's a long-standing tradition of glorifying hustle. Productivity is treated like a moral virtue. Working long hours, skipping meals, bragging about how little sleep we got. These have become badges of honor. Think about how often people answer, busy, when asked how they're doing. Busyness has become a status symbol. And in that culture, taking time to rest, exercise, or cook a healthy meal feels indulgent, even selfish. The message is clear. If you want to get ahead, you have to sacrifice, and health is often the first thing sacrificed. The tragedy is that this sacrifice is short-sighted. A burned-out body and mind can't sustain success. But in the rush to make it, many of us ignore that reality until it's too late. The disconnection from our bodies. Modern life has also created a strange disconnection between us and our physical selves. Technology keeps us glued to screens for hours, often forgetting to move, stretch, or even drink water. Fast food delivers meals without effort, removing us from the process of preparing nourishment. Stress becomes so normalized that we don't even notice the signals our bodies send us, the tight shoulders, the headaches, the shallow breathing. We've become so accustomed to numbing discomfort with caffeine, painkillers, or distractions that we no longer listen to the subtle whispers of our health. Instead, we wait until those whispers become screams, in the form of illness or crisis, before we pay attention. The seduction of later. Another reason we ignore health is the seductive lie of later. We tell ourselves, I'll start exercising when work slows down. I'll eat better after this stressful season. I'll get regular checkups when I have more time. Later always feels like an option, until one day it isn't. This procrastination is fueled by the fact that health is cumulative. Eating a burger today doesn't kill us. Skipping one workout doesn't make us weak. Staying up late for a project doesn't destroy our brains overnight. The consequences are invisible in the short term, which makes it easy to delay. But those small choices, repeated over months and years, are what shape our long-term well-being. It's like ignoring a leak in the roof because it hasn't flooded yet. By the time the water pours in, the damage is far more costly than it would have been if we fixed the leak early. The comfort of denial. Sometimes, ignoring health is less about distraction and more about fear. We avoid checkups, skip dentist appointments, or put off medical screenings because we're afraid of bad news. Denial feels safer than confrontation. If we don't know about the problem, maybe it doesn't exist. But of course, denial never stops reality. Problems don't disappear because we refuse to look at them. They simply grow quietly in the dark. This is why so many people only start caring about their health after a crisis, a heart attack, a diagnosis, a collapse. The crisis forces them to confront what denial helped them ignore. The role of stress and coping. Health neglect is also tied to how we cope with stress. In high-pressure environments, unhealthy habits often serve as quick relief. We drink to unwind, eat comfort food to soothe ourselves, or binge-watch shows instead of going for a walk. These behaviors provide short-term comfort but long-term harm. Stress itself is already damaging to the body, raising blood pressure, suppressing immunity, messing with hormones. When combined with poor coping habits, the damage compounds. Yet in the moment, it feels like survival. We trade long-term health for short-term relief without even thinking twice. Everyday examples. The reasons for ignoring health show up in everyday life. The young professional who skips lunch daily, fueled by coffee, convinced they're proving dedication to the job. The college student who thinks exercise is optional because their body still looks fine. The parent who puts everyone else's needs first, postponing their own checkups year after year. The retiree who never learned about nutrition and assumes it's too late to change. These people aren't careless or stupid. They're caught in the same traps we all face: invincibility, culture, disconnection, denial, and procrastination. Closing reflection. So why do we ignore our health? Because it's easy. Because the body is resilient in the short term. Because culture rewards productivity over rest. Because later always feels like an option. Because denial feels safer than truth. But easy choices are rarely the right ones. Every day we ignore health. We're making silent withdrawals from an account we'll eventually need. And when the bill comes due, in the form of illness, fatigue, or regret, we can't go back and undo the choices. The good news is that awareness is the first step. By recognizing why we ignore health, we can begin to dismantle the illusions, challenge the cultural pressures, and reconnect with our bodies before it's too late. The real costs of neglecting health. If ignoring our health feels harmless in the short term, the long-term bill is staggering. The costs don't always arrive with a loud crash. Sometimes they creep in quietly, accumulating until they can no longer be ignored. These costs are not just physical, they ripple into our mental well-being, relationships, careers, and even our sense of purpose. In this section, let's unpack what really happens when we keep pushing health to the bottom of the priority list. 1. Physical breakdown. The most obvious cost of neglecting health is physical decline. Our bodies are incredibly resilient. But resilience has limits. Years of poor diet, lack of movement, and chronic stress eventually manifest as illness. Heart disease, often called the silent killer. It doesn't appear overnight. It builds slowly from years of unhealthy eating, inactivity, and stress. Type 2 diabetes. Another slow-moving condition that's deeply connected to lifestyle. It develops quietly, often after years of ignoring blood sugar levels. Obesity and joint pain. Skipping exercise may not matter in your 20s. But by your 40s or 50s, the effects are undeniable. Weakened immunity, chronic sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, and constant stress make the body more vulnerable to infections. The harsh reality is that many of the leading causes of death in the modern world are preventable. But prevention requires daily attention, something most of us put off until symptoms force us to act. 2. Mental health struggles. Health neglect doesn't just attack the body, it takes a heavy toll on the mind. Sleep deprivation, poor diet, and lack of movement are strongly linked to depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. Think about how you feel after a week of unhealthy habits: too much fast food, not enough sleep, 0 exercise. Your mood plummets. Motivation disappears. Even small challenges feel overwhelming. That foggy, irritable state isn't just in your head, it's your brain responding to neglect. Over time, untreated stress and poor self-care can lead to chronic mental health conditions. The irony is that when mental health worsens, it often fuels further neglect. A depressed person may lack the energy to exercise or cook healthy meals, creating a vicious cycle. 3. Strained relationships. We often think of health as a personal matter, my body, my choice. But the truth is, the state of our health affects everyone around us. When we neglect ourselves, our relationships suffer. A spouse who's constantly exhausted can't fully show up emotionally. A parent who's sick from preventable illness can't engage with their kids the way they want to. A friend who's mentally burned out has little energy to nurture connections. Over time, neglect leads to resentment. Loved ones may feel burdened by the consequences of choices you made, choices to prioritize work, convenience, or denial over well-being. The cost of neglect, then, is not just borne by the individual but by entire families and communities. 4. Financial consequences. Neglecting health is expensive. Medical bills for preventable conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and obesity-related complications cost individuals and societies billions every year. On a personal level, it shows up as frequent doctor visits and medications, missed work days, leading to lost income, long-term disability that limits earning potential. Ironically, many people skip healthy habits because they feel too expensive. Gym memberships, organic food, wellness programs, these can feel like luxuries. But compared to the cost of long-term illness, they are bargains. The price of prevention is always lower than the price of treatment. 5. Loss of dreams and potential. Beyond the tangible costs, perhaps the saddest consequence of neglecting health is the loss of dreams. A body that's constantly fatigued or sick simply can't pursue passions with the same energy. The musician with arthritis who can no longer play guitar. The traveler grounded by chronic illness. The grandparent too weak to play with their grandchildren. These are not just health issues, they are losses of identity, joy, and purpose. We often think of dreams as limited by money or opportunity. But health is the foundation that makes every dream possible. Without it, even the most exciting opportunities become unreachable. 6. The regret factor. Talk to older adults and you'll hear a common refrain. I wish I had taken better care of myself when I was younger. Regret is one of the most painful costs of health neglect because it comes with the realization that some damage can't be undone. The smoker who develops lung disease can't reverse the years of damage. The workaholic who skipped family time for decades may never get those years back. The person who ignored fitness may find it much harder to build strength later in life. Regret is heavy not because of what happened, but because of what could have been. And it's preventable if we take health seriously now instead of waiting for the future. 7. Generational impact. The costs of neglecting health don't stop with one person, they ripple across generations. Children often adopt the habits they see in their parents. A parent who constantly eats fast food or avoids exercise teaches, without words, that health isn't a priority. On the flip side, a parent who models healthy living sets their kids up for a lifetime of better choices. Neglect or care doesn't just shape one life, it sets a trajectory for entire families. Everyday stories of cost. The burned-out executive who spent decades working 80-hour weeks, only to retire early due to heart disease. The young adult who skipped dentist visits for years, later paying thousands for major dental surgery. The new parent who put off sleep and self-care, ending up in the hospital from sheer exhaustion. The older adult who always promised to start exercising next year, only to find mobility severely limited by age and inactivity. These aren't extreme cases, they're everyday realities for millions of people who thought ignoring health was harmless, until the costs came due. Closing reflection. Neglecting health doesn't just shorten life, it diminishes the quality of life along the way. It steals energy, joy, relationships, money, and dreams. It leaves behind not just illness but regret. The true cost of ignoring health is not measured only in hospital bills or diagnoses, but in lost moments, the moments we could have spent thriving, creating, loving, and living fully. The challenge is to stop waiting for a crisis to remind us of health's importance. By facing the real costs now, we can make different choices before it's too late. Health isn't guaranteed, but neglect guarantees decline. The sooner we act, the more we can preserve the life we want to live. Stories and examples of health neglect. Stories make consequences real. Statistics about heart disease, diabetes, or stress can feel abstract. But when we hear how neglect plays out in actual lives, it hits differently. Health neglect doesn't discriminate, it affects young professionals chasing success, parents juggling responsibilities, celebrities in the spotlight, and ordinary people who never thought it would happen to them. In this section, let's explore stories that reveal what happens when we ignore the warning signs until it's too late. Steve Jobs. Wealth without health. Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple, was one of the most brilliant and influential figures in modern history. He built products that changed the world and left behind a legacy of innovation. But even Jobs, with all his genius and resources, couldn't escape the consequences of health neglect. Jobs was known for his relentless work ethic, obsessive attention to detail, and refusal to slow down. He was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer in 2003. Instead of pursuing immediate treatment, he delayed for months, experimenting with alternative diets and therapies. By the time he fully committed to medical treatment, the disease had advanced. In his final days, Jobs reflected on the limits of money and success. You can hire someone to drive your car for you, make money for you, but you cannot have someone bear the sickness for you. He said, his story is a sobering reminder that no amount of achievement can substitute for health. It's the one resource we can't outsource. The overworked executive. Consider the story of Mark, a fictional but all too common character based on countless real cases. Mark was a high-powered executive who prided himself on long hours. He wore exhaustion like a badge of honor, telling colleagues, "Sleep is for the weak." For years, Mark skipped exercise, ate fast food at his desk, and pushed through constant fatigue with caffeine. At 48, he had a heart attack during a board meeting. The experience shocked him. He thought he was invincible. His doctors told him the truth. Years of neglect had caught up, and recovery would be long and difficult. Mark survived, but his life changed forever. He retired earlier than planned, forced to slow down by a body that could no longer keep pace with his ambitions. The heart attack didn't just alter his career, it altered his identity. The parent who put everyone else first. Health neglect isn't always driven by ambition. Sometimes it comes from selflessness. Take Sarah, a mother of 3. She poured everything into her kids. Late nights helping with homework. Long days juggling work and childcare. Little time for herself. Sarah constantly postponed doctor's appointments, telling herself, "I'll go after things calm down." But life with 3 kids never really calmed down. When Sarah finally went for a checkup, doctors discovered she had advanced hypertension and early signs of diabetes. Both conditions had been building silently for years. Sarah's story reflects a truth many parents know. Putting everyone else first often means neglecting yourself. But the irony is that neglecting self-care eventually robs loved ones of your best self. Sarah's health decline made it harder for her to care for her family the way she wanted to. The athlete who thought health was guaranteed. Not all neglect comes from inactivity. Sometimes it comes from overconfidence. Jason was a college athlete, fit and energetic, who believed his youth and training made him bulletproof. After graduating, he stopped exercising regularly but continued eating like he was burning thousands of calories a day. He also drank heavily on weekends, convinced that his athletic background meant he could handle it. By his early 30s, Jason had gained significant weight, developed high blood pressure, and struggled with chronic fatigue. He was shocked. How could someone who once ran marathons now struggle to climb stairs? The answer was simple. He assumed past fitness guaranteed future health. But health doesn't work that way, it requires ongoing care. Everyday neglect. Quiet stories. Beyond high-profile cases, the most powerful stories are often the quiet ones. The college student who pulls all-nighters, fueled by energy drinks, and laughs off constant exhaustion until they collapse from stress-induced illness. The truck driver who skips medical checkups for years because he doesn't have time, only to discover late-stage disease when it's almost too late. The office worker who ignores chronic back pain, relying on painkillers, until it develops into a serious spinal issue requiring surgery. The retiree who always planned to travel after working hard for decades, but finds themselves too sick to enjoy retirement. Each story illustrates a simple truth. Neglect doesn't feel dangerous in the moment. But the costs are real and often irreversible. Celebrity examples. Even celebrities, with access to the best doctors and trainers, are not immune to health neglect. Singer Whitney Houston battled years of substance abuse that eroded both her health and her legendary career. Actor Chadwick Boseman secretly fought colon cancer, a disease often linked to lifestyle factors and late detection, passing away tragically at 43. Their stories reveal that fame and resources don't erase vulnerability. Health is universal. It demands attention from all of us. Lessons from these stories. Across all these examples, Steve Jobs, the overworked executive, the selfless parent, the former athlete, the everyday worker, and even celebrities, the lesson is consistent. Health cannot be postponed indefinitely. Delaying care makes problems worse. Overconfidence leads to surprise decline. Selflessness without balance backfires. Stress and busyness are not excuses, they're accelerants. What unites these stories is regret. Almost every person who suffers from health neglect wishes they had acted sooner. And almost every one of them had opportunities to change but ignored the signs. Closing reflection. Stories bring truth to life. They remind us that neglect is not an abstract concept, it's a lived reality. It shows up in collapsed executives, exhausted parents, faded athletes, and even world-changing visionaries like Steve Jobs. The point of these stories isn't to scare us but to wake us up. To remind us that health is not optional, not a luxury, not something we can delegate to our future selves. It's the foundation upon which everything else rests: careers, families, dreams, and legacies. We don't need to wait until our own story becomes a cautionary tale. We can choose now to treat health not as an afterthought, but as a daily practice of respect for the only body we'll ever have. Lessons and practical habits for protecting health. We've explored why we ignore our health and the devastating costs of neglect. We've walked through stories of executives, parents, athletes, and even icons who discovered too late that health is not optional. Now it's time to talk about solutions. Awareness is only the first step. Change comes through action. The good news is that protecting health doesn't require radical overnight transformation. It begins with small, consistent habits that build into a lifestyle of resilience. Let's look at the lessons and practices that can help us prioritize health before it's too late. Lesson 1. Health is an investment, not a cost. One of the biggest mindset shifts is realizing that health is not an expense but an investment. Many people think eating nutritious food, paying for gym memberships, or scheduling regular checkups is too expensive or too time-consuming. But compared to the financial, physical, and emotional costs of illness, these choices are bargains. Practical habit. Reframe every health-related expense as a down payment on your future. That $50 for a doctor's visit? Cheaper than thousands in hospital bills later. 30 minutes of exercise? Easier than months of rehabilitation. $10 extra for vegetables? Less than the price of medication for preventable conditions. Lesson 2. Sleep is non-negotiable. Sleep is often the first thing we sacrifice in the name of productivity. Yet it's the foundation of physical and mental health. Chronic sleep deprivation is linked to everything from obesity and diabetes to depression and heart disease. Practical habit. Create a consistent sleep schedule. Go to bed and wake up at the same times. Even on weekends. Develop a pre-sleep routine, dimming lights, turning off screens, reading or journaling, to signal your body it's time to rest. Treat sleep as seriously as you would an important meeting, because your future depends on it. Lesson 3. Move daily, not occasionally. Exercise doesn't have to mean hours in the gym or training for a marathon. What matters most is consistent movement. Our bodies were designed to move, not sit at desks or couches for hours. Regular movement improves cardiovascular health, strengthens muscles and bones, reduces stress, and boosts energy. Practical habit. Find forms of movement you enjoy: walking, dancing, biking, yoga, strength training. Aim for at least 30 minutes a day. But don't underestimate the power of small actions. Taking the stairs, stretching during breaks, or walking while on calls all add up. Consistency beats intensity. Lesson 4. Nutrition is fuel, not just flavor. Food is more than comfort or convenience, it's information for the body. Every meal teaches your cells how to function. Diets heavy in processed foods, sugar, and unhealthy fats send damaging signals, while whole foods rich in nutrients promote vitality. Practical habit. Build meals around whole foods, vegetables, fruits, lean proteins, whole grains, and healthy fats. Practice mindful eating, slow down, savor flavors, and notice how different foods make you feel. Start small, replace soda with water. Add one vegetable to every meal, or cook at home more often. Lesson 5. Manage stress before it manages you. Stress is unavoidable, but chronic stress is toxic. It raises blood pressure, disrupts sleep, weakens immunity, and accelerates aging. The problem isn't stress itself, but the lack of recovery from it. Practical habit. Build stress-relieving rituals into your day. Meditation, deep breathing, journaling, or simply stepping outside for fresh air can all help. Try the 5-minute rule when you feel stress rising. Pause and spend 5 minutes doing something calming. Over time, these micro breaks prevent stress from becoming chronic. Lesson 6. Preventive care saves lives. Many people avoid checkups because they feel unnecessary, especially when they feel fine. But prevention is cheaper, easier, and far less painful than treatment. Routine checkups, screenings, and dental visits can catch problems early when they're most treatable. Practical habit. Schedule annual physical exams, dental cleanings, and recommended screenings based on age and family history. Put them on your calendar as non-negotiable appointments. Think of them as oil changes for your body, maintenance that keeps the engine running smoothly. Lesson 7. Balance selflessness with self-care. It's easy to neglect health in the name of caring for others. Parents, caregivers, and hard-working professionals often put themselves last. But self-neglect doesn't serve anyone. You can't pour from an empty cup. Practical habit. Reframe self-care as part of your responsibility to others. Taking a walk, eating well, or resting isn't selfish, it's equipping yourself to be present and strong for the people who rely on you. Even carving out 15 minutes of personal time daily can recharge your capacity to give. Lesson 8. Build a supportive environment. Habits don't thrive in isolation. Our environment strongly influences whether we succeed or fail. If your fridge is full of junk food, eating healthy becomes harder. If your friends dismiss exercise, motivation slips. Practical habit. Design your environment for health. Stock your kitchen with nutritious food. Place a water bottle on your desk as a reminder to hydrate. Surround yourself with people who encourage your goals. Join a fitness group, cooking class, or online community that makes health a shared journey. Lesson 9. Listen to your body's signals. Your body constantly communicates, but too often we ignore it. Fatigue, headaches, digestive issues, or persistent pain are not just nuisances, they're messages. Ignoring them is like covering your car's check engine light with tape. Practical habit. Practice body awareness. Check in with yourself daily. How do I feel physically? Where am I tense? What patterns am I noticing? Keep a simple log of sleep, energy, mood, and diet to see connections. Respond to small signals before they become emergencies. Lesson 10. Think long-term. Act short-term. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when we think about overhauling health. The key is to remember that long-term transformation comes from short-term choices repeated consistently. Practical habit. Focus on the next right choice. Drink water instead of soda. Walk for 10 minutes instead of scrolling your phone. Go to bed 30 minutes earlier. Each small decision compounds into significant change over time. Health is not about perfection, it's about direction. Closing reflection. Protecting health isn't glamorous. It doesn't always deliver instant results or dramatic before and after stories. But it's the quiet, consistent habits, sleep, movement, nutrition, stress management, preventive care, self-care, supportive environments, listening to our bodies, that shape the quality of our lives. The lesson is simple but profound. Don't wait for a crisis. Health is not something to deal with later, it's the foundation for everything we value: family, work, dreams, and joy. When we honor our health daily, we invest in a future where those things remain possible. So the next time you're tempted to skip sleep, postpone a checkup, or silence your body's signals, remember this: neglect is costly, but care is powerful. Start small, start today, and let those choices compound into the gift of a long, vibrant life. Defining identity only by work. Roots of the problem. Tell me about yourself. It's one of the most common questions we hear. Whether in job interviews, networking events, or casual conversations. And how do most people answer? With their job title. I'm a lawyer. I'm a teacher. I'm an engineer. We define ourselves by what we do, not who we are. There's nothing inherently wrong with being proud of your work. But when work becomes the only lens through which we see our identity, it creates a fragile, unbalanced self-image. Careers rise and fall. Jobs change. Companies restructure. If our entire identity rests on our role at work, what happens when that role is gone? To understand why so many of us make this mistake, we have to explore cultural, historical, and psychological roots. The cultural obsession with productivity. In America, work isn't just what we do, it's who we are. The cultural script says that productivity equals worth. From childhood, kids are praised for grades, trophies, and measurable achievements. By adulthood, the scoreboard shifts to job titles, salaries, and promotions. The Protestant work ethic, a cultural inheritance that glorifies hard work, discipline, and success, still shapes much of modern life. In this framework, to work hard is to be moral, and to rest or slow down is to be lazy. Over time, this ethic morphed into hustle culture, the belief that constant work is not only necessary but noble. This obsession with productivity means we're not just evaluated on what we produce, we internalize that evaluation. If we're not busy, if we're not achieving, we feel worthless. Historical shifts in identity. Historically, identity wasn't always tied so tightly to work. In agricultural societies, people were more likely to identify by family, community, or role within a tribe or village. Work was important, but it wasn't the sole marker of identity. The Industrial Revolution shifted that balance. As people moved from farms to factories, and later to offices, jobs became central to daily life. Cities grew, economies boomed, and individuals began to define themselves less by lineage and more by occupation. This shift accelerated in the 20th century, especially in capitalist societies where careers became both status symbols and personal brands. Today, in a world where LinkedIn headlines and resumes define us at a glance, the link between identity and work is stronger than ever. Psychological drivers. Beyond culture and history, psychology also explains why we equate work with identity. Work provides structure. Jobs organize our days and give us routines. Without them, we can feel lost. Purpose. Careers often give us a sense of contributing to something larger than ourselves. Recognition. Success at work provides validation and status in the eyes of others. Community. Workplaces offer social connection, friendships, and networks. These are powerful psychological needs. But the problem is not that work meets them. The problem is when work becomes the only source that meets them. When identity narrows to a single dimension, it becomes fragile. Lose the job, and you lose the structure, purpose, recognition, and community all at once. The social reinforcement loop. Society reinforces this narrow identity in subtle but powerful ways. When people meet you, the first question they ask is, "What do you do?" Rarely do they mean hobbies, passions, or values. They mean, "What's your job?" That question alone creates pressure. If you have a prestigious title, you feel validated. If your job is less socially celebrated, you may feel embarrassed. Over time, people learn to present themselves primarily through their work, leaving other parts of identity hidden. Social media compounds the problem. LinkedIn feeds are full of job announcements, promotions, and professional achievements. Instagram highlights lifestyles funded by successful careers. The unspoken message is that professional identity is the most important, if not the only, identity worth sharing. The role of insecurity. For many, defining identity by work isn't just cultural conditioning, it's also a coping mechanism for insecurity. When people feel uncertain about who they are, latching onto a career provides a ready-made identity. It's easier to say, I'm a doctor, than to wrestle with deeper questions like, what do I value? Or, who am I outside of achievement? The danger is that this kind of identity feels strong in the short term but collapses in the long term. It's like building a house on sand. As long as the job is secure, the identity feels secure. But jobs change, industries collapse, layoffs happen, retirement comes. When the foundation shifts, identity crumbles. Everyday examples. This mistake shows up in countless lives. The college student who majors in a field solely for prestige, believing their worth depends on the eventual title. The professional who works 70 hours a week, convinced that busyness equals importance, even as relationships deteriorate. The retiree who spirals into depression because they no longer have a career to anchor their identity. The stay-at-home parent who feels invisible at social gatherings because they don't have a job to mention when asked. What do you do? Each example highlights the same problem. Identity tied too tightly to a role that is temporary by nature. The fragility of a one-dimensional identity. When identity rests solely on work, it becomes fragile. A single setback, a demotion, a failed business, an unexpected layoff, can trigger an identity crisis. People often describe feeling lost or worthless after losing a job. Not just because of the financial strain but because of the collapse of self-image. This fragility also creates fear. If who you are is tied to work, you'll be less willing to take risks, change careers, or slow down. The fear of losing identity becomes a cage, locking you into paths that may no longer serve you. Closing reflection. Defining ourselves only by our work is seductive because it feels simple. It gives us a ready-made answer to the question of identity. But that simplicity comes at a cost: fragility, insecurity, and imbalance. The roots of this mistake lie in cultural obsession with productivity, historical shifts in how identity is framed, psychological needs for purpose and validation, and social reinforcement loops. Together, they create a powerful pull to equate who we are with what we do. The challenge is to recognize this pull for what it is: a trap. Work is important, but it is not the whole story. The next step is to examine what happens when people fall fully into this trap. The consequences of building identity on a single, unstable foundation. The consequences of over-identifying with work. When work becomes the only lens through which we see ourselves, the costs run deep. On the surface, it might look admirable: the dedicated professional, the ambitious leader, the tireless worker who lives for the job. Society often applauds these traits. But beneath the applause lies exhaustion, emptiness, and fragility. Over time, defining identity only by work chips away at every other part of life. Let's explore the consequences. 1. The risk of burnout. When identity is tied to work, the line between effort and obsession disappears. Every setback feels personal. Every challenge becomes a referendum on worth. Instead of working to live, we live to work, and that's a fast track to burnout. Burnout isn't just being tired. It's a deep exhaustion that seeps into body, mind, and spirit. It shows up as physical fatigue, constant exhaustion, frequent illness, and sleep problems, emotional depletion, feeling detached, cynical, or numb, loss of motivation. Once exciting projects feel meaningless. People often mistake burnout for weakness. But it's the natural consequence of pouring identity into a single, bottomless cup. 2. Fragile self-worth. If work is the only source of self-esteem, success feels euphoric, but failure feels catastrophic. A missed deadline, a poor performance review, or a lost client doesn't just bruise the ego, it shatters the self. This fragility creates a roller coaster of emotions. On good days, confidence soars. On bad days, self-worth collapses. Instead of being grounded in stable values, identity rises and falls with the unpredictable tides of the workplace. 3. Neglected relationships. Over-identification with work often leads to neglected relationships. If career is the centerpiece of identity, everything else becomes secondary. Spouses, children, friends, and even self-care get pushed to the margins. How many people have missed family dinners, kids' recitals, or meaningful conversations because they were too busy? At first, loved ones may be understanding, but over time, neglect breeds resentment. Relationships wither not from a single dramatic break but from years of slow erosion. And when career inevitably falters, as it does for everyone at some point, people often discover they've sacrificed the very support systems they need most. 4. Loss of joy in other areas. Life is full of rich identities: parent, sibling, friend, artist, volunteer, neighbor, dreamer. When work dominates identity, these other roles are sidelined. The guitar gathers dust. The running shoes stay in the closet. Friendships fade. The tragedy is that these sidelined roles often bring the deepest joy. Work provides achievement, but hobbies and relationships provide meaning. When those are neglected, life narrows. Days become a loop of meetings, deadlines, and performance reviews, a loop that feels increasingly hollow. 5. Fear of change. When identity is fused with career, change becomes terrifying. A person whose entire identity is, "I'm a lawyer," or "I'm an engineer," may feel trapped. Even if they're unhappy, the thought of switching careers or taking a break feels like losing oneself entirely. This fear locks people into jobs that drain them. They endure toxic environments, unethical practices, or sheer boredom because the alternative feels like erasing their identity. Instead of exploring new chapters, they cling to old ones long past their expiration date. 6. Vulnerability to external forces. Work-centered identity is also fragile because it depends on forces beyond our control. Companies downsize, industries collapse, economies shift, automation changes the landscape. When identity rests entirely on career, external disruptions feel like personal annihilation. A layoff isn't just a job loss, it's an identity crisis. Retirement doesn't feel like freedom, it feels like death of self. The ground disappears because the foundation was never stable to begin with. 7. Diminished creativity and risk-taking. Ironically, defining identity by work often stifles the very innovation workplaces need. When failure feels like an existential threat, people stop taking risks. They play it safe, clinging to proven methods instead of exploring new ones. Creativity shrinks under the weight of fear. Think of the artist who stops experimenting because failure might ruin their reputation. Or the entrepreneur who avoids bold ideas because one flop might destroy their sense of self. When identity is fragile, experimentation feels too costly, and growth stalls. 8. Post-career crisis. Perhaps the clearest consequence appears in retirement. People who build identities around work often struggle profoundly when the career chapter closes. Without titles, meetings, or achievements, they feel invisible. Depression and loneliness rise, not because life is over but because identity feels over. This is why so many retirees struggle to adjust. If your answer to, "Who am I?" has always been your job title, retirement leaves you speechless. Real-world illustrations. The CEO who lost his company in a market crash and spiraled into despair because his entire self-image was tied to leadership. The lawyer who worked 70-hour weeks for decades, only to discover her children barely knew her as more than a visitor in their lives. The teacher who loved her work but, after retiring, fell into depression because she no longer felt needed. The young professional who clung to a toxic job out of fear, because leaving would mean admitting failure. Each story highlights the same truth. When identity is tethered too tightly to work, life outside of it becomes shallow, fragile, or even non-existent. The emotional toll. Beyond the practical consequences, the emotional toll is immense. Over-identification with work breeds anxiety, insecurity, and emptiness. People often describe feeling like hamsters on a wheel, constantly running but never arriving anywhere meaningful. Success brings temporary relief, but the hunger always returns, demanding more. The ultimate consequence is disconnection, from others, from joy, and even from oneself. Closing reflection. On the surface, defining ourselves by work looks admirable. It wins praise, promotions, and maybe even envy. But beneath the surface, it erodes relationships, stifles creativity, breeds fear, and sets us up for crises when careers shift. The truth is simple but hard to accept. Work is something we do, not who we are. When we confuse the two, we build our identity on sand. The tide will eventually come in, and when it does, the structures we built collapse. The challenge is not to abandon work, but to put it in its proper place. Work can be meaningful, but it must not be the whole story. In the next section, we'll explore stories of people who lived this imbalance, and what their experiences teach us about building a fuller identity. Stories and case studies of work-centered identity. Sometimes the best way to understand an idea is through lived experience. Theories about identity and work can sound abstract, but when we step into the lives of real people, famous figures, everyday workers, and even fictional composites drawn from common patterns, the lesson becomes painfully clear. Over-identifying with work often ends not in fulfillment but in emptiness. In this section, let's explore stories that reveal the danger of tying identity too tightly to career. The CEO who couldn't let go. Richard was the classic image of success. He built a company from scratch, grew it into a global enterprise, and became known as a visionary leader. For decades, his life revolved around boardrooms, investor calls, and high-stakes decisions. He loved the adrenaline of business. But more than that, he loved the identity. I am the CEO. When Richard retired at 65, he expected to enjoy his wealth and freedom. But within months, he spiraled into depression. Without his title, he felt invisible. Friends and family noticed a man who seemed lost, restless, and increasingly bitter. He would retell stories of his business days as if clinging to proof of his worth. Richard's downfall wasn't financial. He had plenty of money. It was existential. He had built his entire identity on work. And when work disappeared, so did his sense of self. The lawyer who missed her family. Sarah was a high-powered attorney at a prestigious firm. From the outside, she was thriving, long hours, big cases, big paychecks, but behind closed doors, her family life suffered. Her children often ate dinner without her. Her husband felt more like a roommate than a partner. Birthdays and anniversaries were missed in the name of just one more case. For years, Sarah told herself it was worth it, that she was working for her family's future. But when her teenage daughter once said, "Mom, it feels like your job is more important than me," the truth hit hard. Sarah realized that in defining herself only as a lawyer, she had neglected the roles of mother, wife, and friend. Her story highlights a painful truth. When work consumes identity, relationships shrink, and sometimes, by the time you realize it, the damage is already done. The teacher who lost purpose in retirement. David was a beloved high school teacher. For 35 years, he poured his heart into his students. Teaching wasn't just what he did, it was who he was. He stayed late to mentor struggling kids, spent weekends grading papers, and treated teaching as a calling. When David retired, the transition was brutal. Without classrooms and students, he felt purposeless. Days stretched long and empty. Depression crept in, and he confessed to friends, "I don't know who I am anymore." David's devotion wasn't wrong. His work touched countless lives. But by making teaching his entire identity, he left himself unprepared for life beyond it. Retirement should have been a season of freedom and joy. Instead, it felt like exile. The startup founder who burned out. Emily was a millennial entrepreneur who launched a tech startup in her 20s. For years, she lived and breathed her company. Every success felt like personal validation. Every setback felt like personal failure. She proudly wore the title, founder, like armor. But after a few intense years of non-stop hustle, Emily hit a wall. Burnout arrived with a vengeance, panic attacks, insomnia, and physical exhaustion. When investors pressured her to step aside, she felt like her life had ended. "If I'm not a founder," she told herself, "then I'm nothing." Her story reflects a growing pattern in startup culture. Founders and entrepreneurs who tie identity so tightly to their companies that when those ventures falter, their mental health collapses. Everyday workers, everyday struggles. Not all stories involve high-powered careers. Over-identifying with work happens at every level. The factory worker who measures his worth entirely by hours on the job. When layoffs come, he feels useless, even though his value as a father and friend remains. The nurse who sacrifices personal health to care for patients, defining herself solely by her role as caregiver, until burnout forces her to quit. The stay-at-home parent who feels invisible because society undervalues caregiving as not real work. Even though raising children is one of the most demanding roles, these examples show that the problem isn't about prestige or income level, it's about imbalance. When work, whatever form it takes, becomes the entire story, other roles fade away. Celebrity case studies. Even in the world of fame, The danger is visible. Athletes often struggle profoundly after retirement. Consider professional football players who, after years of being celebrated for their strength and skill, suddenly find themselves without the sport that defined them. Many battle depression, addiction, or financial ruin because their identity was tied to a career that ended in their 30s. Actors and musicians face similar crises. When the spotlight dims, many wrestle with feelings of irrelevance. Fame becomes a prison when it's the only source of identity, because it inevitably fades. These cases underline a universal truth. Whether you're a CEO, a teacher, an athlete, or an everyday worker, identity built solely on work eventually crumbles. Lessons from these stories. The common threads in these stories are clear. Fragility. When work disappears, identity collapses. Neglect. Relationships and personal well-being suffer. Regret. Many realize too late that life is more than career milestones. Unpreparedness, retirement, layoffs, or career changes feel like death sentences instead of new beginnings. What these stories teach us is not that work is unimportant, it can be deeply meaningful. But when it becomes the only defining feature of identity, it sets us up for pain. A healthy life requires multiple anchors, not just one. Closing reflection. Stories reveal what theory alone cannot. The lived cost of building identity only on work. From CEOs to teachers, from startup founders to athletes, the pattern is consistent. Work-centered identity feels powerful in the moment but fragile in the long run. The challenge is not to abandon dedication or ambition but to broaden identity. We must see ourselves as more than job titles, as friends, family members, creators, dreamers, and human beings with worth beyond productivity. In the next section, we'll explore how to do exactly that. Practical lessons and habits for building a balanced identity that includes work but isn't consumed by it. Lessons and practical habits for building a balanced identity. We've seen the roots of over-identifying with work, the heavy consequences, and the real-life stories of people who struggled when career became their only anchor. The question now is, how do we avoid this trap? How can we build identities that include work but don't collapse without it? The answer lies in shifting perspective and practicing habits that broaden our sense of self. Lesson 1. Redefine the question, who am I? Most of us default to answering that question with our job title. I'm a doctor. I'm an engineer. I'm a manager. But identity is more than occupation. Try expanding your answer. I'm a father, a reader, a neighbor, a volunteer. I happen to work as a doctor. This small shift reframes work as part of identity, not the whole story. Practical habit. Write down a personal identity map. Create categories like family, hobbies, values, community, and spirituality. List roles and qualities in each. This exercise reminds you that you're many things, not just one. Lesson 2. Build multiple anchors. If your entire self-worth rests on a single pillar, work, then losing it feels catastrophic. But if identity rests on multiple pillars, the structure is stronger. Relationships, hobbies, values, and faith can all serve as anchors alongside career. Practical habit. Invest intentionally in at least 3 non-work anchors. Join a local club, nurture friendships, develop a hobby, or volunteer. Treat these activities as seriously as you would meetings at work. They are not distractions, they are identity insurance. Lesson 3. Set boundaries with work. One reason work dominates identity is because it dominates time. If work consumes every waking hour, it naturally overshadows everything else. Boundaries are essential. Practical habit. Create a shutdown ritual at the end of the workday. This might mean closing your laptop, writing tomorrow's to-do list, and physically leaving your workspace. Symbolically and literally, you tell yourself, work is done for today. This frees mental space for other roles. Lesson 4. Practice presence outside of work. Even when we're not at work, our minds often linger there. We check emails during dinner. We think about projects while playing with our kids. Presence is diluted, and relationships suffer. Practical habit. Use small mindfulness techniques to stay present. When with loved ones, silence notifications. At meals, put your phone out of reach. When your mind drifts to work, gently pull it back to the current moment. Being fully present reinforces the value of roles outside of career. Lesson 5. Cultivate joy without productivity. Work conditions is to measure value by output. What did I accomplish today? That mindset can infect leisure, making us feel guilty for activities that aren't productive. But identity needs joy for joy's sake. Practical habit. Schedule guilt-free fun. Read a novel, paint, play basketball, or garden, not to monetize it, not to improve, but simply to enjoy. Protect these activities from the urge to turn everything into a side hustle or achievement. Lesson 6. Reframe retirement and career transitions. One of the biggest identity shocks comes at retirement or career change. But these transitions don't have to be crises, they can be opportunities to rediscover identity. Practical habit. Even if retirement is decades away, start cultivating roles outside of work now. Explore hobbies, strengthen relationships, and clarify values. For those closer to retirement, create a vision not just of financial security but of personal fulfillment. Ask, what will give me purpose when I no longer have a job title? Lesson 7. Root identity in values, not roles. Roles are temporary, jobs come and go, but values, kindness, curiosity, integrity, resilience, remain. When identity is grounded in values, it becomes more stable and portable. Practical habit. Write a personal mission statement. Focus not on what you do, but on who you want to be. For example, I want to live with integrity, care for others, and keep learning. This identity holds whether you're employed, retired, or between jobs. Lesson 8. Build community outside of work. Workplaces provide social connection, but if they're your only source, losing the job means losing community. Building friendships and belonging outside of work strengthens identity. Practical habit. Join a faith group, community organization, sports team, or book club. Nurture friendships where conversations aren't dominated by job titles. Community grounded in shared humanity, not shared employment, reinforces identity beyond work. Lesson 9. Embrace rest as part of identity. In hustle culture, rest feels like wasted time. But rest isn't just recovery, it's an expression of identity. By resting, we affirm that we are human beings, not machines. Practical habit. Schedule rest the way you schedule meetings. Protect time for sleep, leisure, and Sabbath-like breaks. Learn to say no to work demands when they threaten your well-being. Rest is not an enemy of productivity, it's the soil in which creativity and resilience grow. Lesson 10. See yourself as a whole human being. At the core, the biggest lesson is this: you are more than your job. Work matters, but it is not your essence. Your worth doesn't rise and fall with your title or paycheck. You are a whole human being, with relationships, dreams, values, and contributions that extend far beyond career. Practical habit. Every morning, remind yourself, I am more than what I do. Say it aloud, write it down, let it sink in until it becomes part of your daily lens. Closing reflection. The trap of defining identity only by work is powerful because it feels safe and socially rewarded. But as we've seen, it's a fragile foundation. The way out is not to abandon ambition but to broaden identity, to root it in multiple anchors. In values, in community, in joy, and in humanity itself. The practical habits may seem small: journaling, boundaries, hobbies, rest, but together they form a shield against the fragility of work-centered identity. They remind us that when careers shift, when titles fade, when retirement comes, who we are remains. In the end, the healthiest identity is one that includes work but doesn't depend on it. Work can be part of the story, but never the whole book. Earning money without learning to manage it. Roots of the problem. Money is one of the most talked about yet least understood forces in our lives. We spend years in school learning math, science, literature, and history, but very little about personal finance. We enter adulthood chasing paychecks, assuming that as long as we earn enough, everything will fall into place. But the truth is sobering. Earning money without learning how to manage it is like pouring water into a leaky bucket. No matter how much flows in, it slips away just as quickly. To understand why so many people fall into this trap, we have to look at cultural narratives, education gaps, psychological habits, and social pressures that shape our relationship with money. The myth that earning equals wealth. From childhood, we're fed a simple equation: the more you earn, the wealthier you'll be. It seems logical: higher salary, bigger house, nicer car, better life. But reality proves otherwise. Countless stories show people earning six-figure salaries living paycheck to paycheck, while others with modest incomes quietly build financial freedom. Why? Because income and wealth are not the same. Income is what comes in. Wealth is what you keep and grow. Without management, income becomes fleeting, but society rarely makes this distinction clear. Instead, we're taught to chase income without learning the skills to transform it into long-term stability. The education gap. One of the biggest roots of poor money management is simply a lack of education. Most schools don't teach personal finance. Students graduate knowing how to solve algebra equations but not how to budget, invest, or use credit responsibly. This gap leaves young adults entering the workforce with little guidance. They sign up for credit cards without understanding interest rates. They take on student loans without grasping repayment terms. They start jobs without knowing how to save for retirement. By the time they realize the importance of financial literacy, mistakes have already piled up. It's not that people don't want to manage money well, it's that they've never been shown how. Psychological habits around money. Beyond education, psychology plays a major role in money mismanagement. Humans are wired for immediate gratification. Spending delivers a quick dopamine hit, while saving and investing require patience. It's far easier to buy the new phone today than to imagine the power of compound interest decades from now. There's also the emotional side of money. For some, spending becomes a way to soothe stress or assert independence. For others, saving feels like deprivation, even punishment. These habits often stem from childhood experiences, how parents modeled money, whether scarcity or abundance shaped the household, and how financial struggles were handled. Without awareness, these psychological patterns follow us into adulthood, undermining even the best intentions. The social pressure to spend. Modern society doesn't make financial discipline easy. Advertising constantly tells us that happiness is just one purchase away. Social media floods us with curated images of luxury vacations, designer clothes, and lavish lifestyles. And our culture often equates success with visible consumption. The bigger the house, the flashier the car, the fancier the dinner, the more successful you must be. This pressure leads many to live beyond their means. They spend to project an image, to keep up with peers, or to meet unspoken social expectations. But behind the image often lies debt, stress, and financial fragility. The illusion of later. Much like health, money is often a victim of procrastination. People tell themselves, I'll start saving when I earn more. I'll invest once I understand it better. I'll build a budget when life calms down. Later always feels like an option, until emergencies strike and savings are non-existent. The problem is that money grows with time. The earlier you manage it, the more powerful compounding becomes. Waiting even a few years can cost thousands, sometimes millions, in lost potential. But because the benefits are invisible in the short term, people keep pushing money management to the future. The overconfidence trap. Another root of poor money management is overconfidence. Many high earners believe their income will always protect them. Doctors, lawyers, tech workers, and entrepreneurs sometimes assume that because they earn more than average, they don't need to budget or plan. But lifestyle inflation, the tendency to spend more as income rises, often cancels out high salaries. The result? People earning $200 a year can feel as financially stressed as those earning $50 if their expenses rise to match. Overconfidence blinds them to the truth. Wealth isn't about what you make, it's about what you keep. The credit system and easy debt. In modern economies, debt is easier to access than ever. Credit cards, personal loans, and buy now pay later options lure people into spending money they don't actually have. Without financial literacy, many fall into the trap of minimum payments, snowballing interest, and mounting stress. This ease of borrowing feeds the illusion that income alone is enough. As long as paychecks cover monthly bills, even inflated ones, people assume they're fine. But debt quietly grows, eroding financial stability until a crisis reveals the cracks. Everyday examples. The young professional who earns a solid salary but spends it all on nightlife, vacations, and gadgets, leaving nothing saved. The family living in a big house with 2 luxury cars but secretly drowning in credit card debt. The retiree who spent decades earning but never saved, now relying entirely on Social Security. The entrepreneur who made millions but went bankrupt because expenses ballooned faster than revenue. Each example illustrates the same root problem. Money without management is fleeting. Closing reflection. Earning money without learning to manage it is one of the most common and costly mistakes people make. The roots lie in myths about income equaling wealth, gaps in financial education, psychological habits, social pressure, procrastination, overconfidence, and the easy lure of debt. The tragedy is that this mistake isn't limited to the poor or the wealthy. It affects people at every income level. And the cost isn't just financial, it's emotional stress, broken relationships, lost opportunities, and shattered dreams. But the good news is that unlike some mistakes, this one is preventable. Money management is a skill, not a mystery. The earlier we uncover these roots and learn the basics, the sooner we can build stability and freedom. In the next section, we'll explore the consequences when we fail to do so, the real costs of money mismanagement. The consequences of poor money management. Earning money feels empowering. It gives us options, status, and a sense of security. But without management, money slips through our fingers like sand. The consequences of poor financial habits are often invisible at first. A little debt here, a late payment there. Over time, though, those small cracks widen into deep fractures that impact not only our wallets but our stress levels, relationships, opportunities, and even our sense of freedom. 1. Living paycheck to paycheck. One of the most common consequences of poor money management is living in a cycle of paycheck to paycheck. Even with good salaries, many people find themselves broke a few days before payday, waiting anxiously for the next deposit. This lifestyle creates constant stress. Every car repair, medical bill, or unexpected expense becomes a crisis. Without savings, emergencies turn into debt, and debt snowballs into a never-ending cycle. The emotional toll is heavy: anxiety, shame, and the nagging fear of financial collapse. 2. Crushing debt. Poor money management often leads to debt spirals. Credit cards, student loans, personal loans, and car payments pile up until monthly obligations eat away most of the paycheck. High-interest debt is especially destructive. A $5 credit card balance, left unpaid, can double in just a few years. Many people end up paying far more in interest than they ever borrowed in principal. The stress of debt weighs on mental health, creating feelings of hopelessness and shame. 3. Missed opportunities. Perhaps the most painful consequence isn't just the debt itself but the opportunities lost because of it. Money mismanagement robs people of choices. The person without savings can't afford to leave a toxic job. The family drowning in credit card debt can't buy a home. The retiree who didn't invest early can't enjoy travel or leisure in later years. Money doesn't guarantee happiness, but poor management guarantees limitations. Dreams shrink not because they're impossible but because financial instability leaves no room for them. 4. Strained relationships. Finances are one of the leading causes of tension in relationships. Couples often argue about spending habits, debt, and financial priorities. One partner may be frugal while the other overspends, creating resentment. Families may experience guilt and blame when poor money management affects children's opportunities. Divorce lawyers often note that financial stress is one of the biggest contributors to marital breakdowns. Poor money management isn't just about numbers, it's about trust, communication, and shared responsibility. 5. Stalled wealth building. Money mismanagement doesn't just create immediate problems, it sabotages long-term growth. When money is constantly consumed by spending and debt, there's little left for saving or investing. That means missing out on the power of compound interest, the single greatest force in wealth building. Consider this. Investing just $200 a month starting at age 25 could grow to over $400 by age 65, assuming a modest 7% return. But delaying until 35 cuts that number in half. The consequence of poor management isn't just what's lost now, it's what's lost decades into the future. 6. Increased vulnerability to crisis. Financial mismanagement leaves people unprepared for life's inevitable surprises, medical emergencies, job loss, economic downturns. Without an emergency fund or safety net, Even minor setbacks can spiral into major crises. During the COVID-19 pandemic, millions of people suddenly found themselves unemployed. Those without savings or financial strategies suffered the most. Many lost homes, went deep into debt, or relied on government aid just to survive. The pandemic revealed what financial experts had always known: mismanagement leaves people vulnerable when life takes an unexpected turn. 7. Emotional and mental strain. Money stress doesn't stay in the bank account, it seeps into every part of life. Chronic financial anxiety can cause insomnia, headaches, depression, and even physical illness. People often describe feeling trapped or buried alive by debt and poor money choices. The emotional toll creates a vicious cycle. Stress leads to avoidance, ignoring bills, delaying conversations, or pretending the problem doesn't exist. Avoidance makes the situation worse, which fuels even more stress. 8. The illusion of success. Another subtle but damaging consequence of poor management is the illusion of success. Many people look wealthy on the outside: new cars, fancy homes, designer clothes, but behind the scenes, debt and financial chaos tell a different story. This illusion is dangerous because it hides the truth. Friends and neighbors may admire the image, but the reality is sleepless nights, unpaid bills, and fragile finances. Eventually, the illusion collapses, leaving behind embarrassment and regret. 9. Generational impact. Poor money management doesn't just affect individuals, it ripples through families. Children who grow up in financially unstable homes often absorb the same habits. If parents constantly live paycheck to paycheck, kids may normalize that cycle. If parents avoid conversations about money, children enter adulthood financially illiterate. Generational wealth isn't just about passing down money, it's about passing down habits. Poor management ensures that the cycle of struggle continues. 10. Retirement without security. Perhaps the most sobering consequence is reaching retirement without financial security. Many people spend decades working but arrive at retirement with little savings. Without pensions or investments, they rely solely on government benefits, which often aren't enough. The result is retirement filled with stress instead of rest. Instead of enjoying travel, hobbies, or time with family, many retirees are forced back into part-time work or experience deep financial insecurity. All because money was earned but never managed. Everyday stories of consequence. The young doctor who earns 6 figures but spends it all. Trapped in debt from luxury cars and vacations. The middle-aged couple arguing constantly about finances, unable to save for their children's college. The retiree stocking grocery shelves at 70 because there's no nest egg to fall back on. The single parent juggling 3 jobs but still unable to escape debt because of poor money habits learned young. Each story highlights the same truth: earning is not enough. Without management, money becomes a source of stress rather than security. Closing reflection. The consequences of poor money management are not just financial, they're deeply human. They touch our emotions, our relationships, our opportunities, and our futures. They rob us of freedom and peace of mind. The good news is that while the consequences are severe, they are also preventable. Money management isn't reserved for financial experts or the wealthy, it's a skill anyone can learn. And learning it transforms money from a source of stress into a tool for freedom. In the next section, we'll explore stories of people who either mismanaged or mastered money, and what those real-world examples can teach us about financial health. Stories and case studies of money mismanagement. Statistics can show us the scope of financial mismanagement, but stories make it real. Behind every number is a person, a family, a dream either realized or lost. Some stories are cautionary tales. Others are hopeful reminders that change is possible. Let's walk through a few case studies, from lottery winners to everyday families, to see how earning without managing money can play out. The lottery curse. One of the most striking examples of poor money management is the fate of many lottery winners. Studies show that nearly 70% of lottery winners end up broke within just a few years. Take Jack Whittaker, who won $315 million in a Powerball jackpot in 2002. Overnight, he became one of the richest men in America. But instead of building long-term security, he spent lavishly, gave away enormous sums without oversight, and struggled with personal turmoil. Within a few years, His fortune was gone, and his life was marked by tragedy. His story reveals a painful truth. Money amplifies habits. If someone has poor financial habits with $30 a year, they'll likely have poor habits with $30 million a year, just at a larger scale. Earning more money doesn't solve financial problems. Learning to manage it does. The professional athlete. Professional athletes provide another vivid case study. Despite earning millions during their careers, many athletes end up bankrupt. A Sports Illustrated report once estimated that 78% of NFL players go broke or face serious financial stress within 2 years of retirement. Why? Because careers are short, spending is high, and financial literacy is often low. Many athletes grow up without money, then suddenly receive huge checks without the skills to handle them. They buy mansions, cars, and jewelry, support large entourages, and fall prey to bad investments. Take Antoine Walker, a former NBA star who earned over $100 million during his career. Within a few years of retirement, he filed for bankruptcy. His story is not unique, it's a pattern repeated across sports. The lesson is clear: income, even massive income, cannot protect you from poor money management. The family next door. Not all stories are dramatic. Sometimes, the most instructive ones are the quiet struggles of everyday families. Consider a middle-class couple, John and Lisa. They both work decent jobs, earning a combined income of $90 a year. By all appearances, they're doing fine: a nice house, 2 cars, vacations every summer. But behind the scenes, John and Lisa are buried in debt. Credit card balances climb each month. Their mortgage is higher than they can comfortably afford. They have no emergency savings, and retirement accounts are nearly empty. One unexpected medical bill sends them spiraling into financial panic. John and Lisa's story is common. They aren't reckless, they simply never learned to budget, save, or plan for the future. They assumed that as long as money came in, everything was fine. But without management, even solid incomes can't guarantee stability. The young professional, Emma, graduated college and landed her first real job making $55 a year. Excited by her new independence, she quickly leased a new car, bought designer clothes, and furnished her apartment on credit. At first, Emma felt empowered, but soon, minimum payments on credit cards ate into her paycheck. She skipped contributions to her 401k because retirement is decades away. When student loan bills arrived, she panicked. Despite earning more than she ever had before, Emma felt broke. Emma's story reflects a common trap for young professionals: lifestyle inflation. As income rises, so do expenses, leaving no room for savings or security. Without financial education, many fall into the same cycle, mistaking income for wealth. The self-made millionaire who lost it all. Not all cautionary tales involve salaries or lottery winnings. Some involve entrepreneurs who built fortunes only to lose them through mismanagement. Consider the story of Mike Tyson, one of the most famous boxers in history. During his career, he earned over $300 million. But by 2003, he filed for bankruptcy. Lavish spending, poor investments, and lack of financial oversight drained his fortune. Tyson's story illustrates another important lesson: discipline matters more than dollars. No matter how much you earn, without discipline and planning, it can vanish. Stories of hope. Turning things around. Not every story ends in disaster. Some show the power of learning to manage money, even after mistakes. The debt-ridden couple who turned their lives around by following a strict budget, paying off credit cards, and slowly building savings. The single mom who, despite a modest income, used financial literacy programs to create stability, teaching her kids habits she never learned growing up. The retiree who started saving late in life but committed to consistent contributions, proving it's never too late to change direction. These stories remind us that financial mismanagement doesn't have to be permanent. With education, discipline, and support, new chapters can be written. What these stories teach us: across all these cases, patterns emerge. Money amplifies habits. Without discipline, more income only means more spending. Lack of financial education leaves people vulnerable. No matter their background, social pressure and lifestyle inflation silently drain wealth. Recovery is possible, but it requires humility, discipline, and often a complete shift in mindset. The key takeaway is that money itself isn't the problem. The problem is our relationship with it, how we understand it, manage it, and plan for its role in our lives. Closing reflection. From lottery winners to athletes, from young professionals to middle-class families, the stories are consistent. Earning without managing leads to stress, regret, and collapse. The good news is that these stories don't have to be repeated. They can serve as warnings, guiding us toward better choices. Financial health isn't about how much money passes through your hands, it's about how much you keep, how you grow it, and how you use it to build a life of freedom rather than chains. In the next section, we'll explore practical lessons and habits for mastering money management, the tools anyone can use to break the cycle and build lasting security. Lessons and practical habits for financial management. If the first 3 parts of this section showed us the roots, consequences, and stories of money mismanagement, then this part is about solutions. The truth is that financial stability isn't reserved for the wealthy or the lucky, it's the result of consistent, intentional habits. Anyone can learn to manage money, but it requires a shift in mindset and daily practice. Let's explore the lessons and practical habits that transform money from a source of stress into a tool for freedom. Lesson 1. Know where your money goes. The first step to managing money is awareness. Many people spend without realizing where their paycheck actually goes. Without clarity, budgets feel impossible and savings remain a dream. Practical habit. Track every dollar for 30 days. You don't need fancy apps, a notebook or spreadsheet works fine. Write down income and expenses. At the end of the month, categorize them: housing, food, transportation, debt, entertainment. This exercise alone often shocks people into awareness. You can't manage what you don't measure. Lesson 2. Create a budget that reflects your priorities. Budgets often get a bad reputation, as if they're cages designed to restrict joy. But a budget isn't punishment, it's a plan. It tells your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. Practical habit. Try the 50-30-20 rule. Allocate 50% of income to needs, rent, groceries, bills, 30% to wants, dining out, entertainment, hobbies, and 20% to savings and debt repayment. Adjust based on your life, but keep the principle. Align spending with priorities, not impulses. Lesson 3. Build an emergency fund. Life is unpredictable: car repairs, medical bills, sudden job loss. Without savings, these events turn into crises. An emergency fund is financial oxygen, giving you breathing room when life punches hard. Practical habit. Start small. Aim for $500 as your first milestone. Then work toward covering 3 to 6 months of expenses. Keep it in a separate savings account, not mixed with daily spending, so you're less tempted to dip into it. Lesson 4. Pay off high-interest debt aggressively. Debt is a financial parasite. While some forms of debt, like low-interest mortgages, can be manageable, high-interest debt, especially credit cards, drains wealth faster than most people realize. Practical habit. Use the debt snowball or avalanche method. Snowball. Pay off the smallest debt first. Then roll that payment into the next. Building momentum. Avalanche. Pay off the debt with the highest interest rate first. Minimizing long-term cost. Whichever method you choose, consistency is key. Each payment is a step toward freedom. Lesson 5. Save before you spend. Many people try to save what's left after spending, but often there's nothing left. The solution is to flip the equation: save first, spend later. Practical habit. Automate savings. Set up direct deposit into a savings or investment account as soon as your paycheck arrives. Even if it's just $50 a month, the habit matters more than the amount. Over time, small contributions compound into meaningful wealth. Lesson 6. Learn the basics of investing. Savings protect you, but investing grows you. Inflation slowly erodes the value of money sitting idle. Investing allows your money to work for you, building wealth over time. Practical habit. Start simple. Contribute to employer retirement accounts, like a 401k, or open an IRA. Use low-cost index funds that spread risk across many companies. Don't chase get-rich-quick schemes. Wealth grows slowly and steadily. If you don't understand an investment, don't put money into it. Lesson 7. Live below your means. Not just within them. Living within your means prevents debt. But living below your means builds freedom. The extra margin between income and expenses becomes fuel for savings, investing, and opportunities. Practical habit. Practice intentional spending. Before buying, ask, does this align with my priorities? Will I still value this a year from now? Often, the answer reveals that short-term impulses aren't worth long-term sacrifices. Lesson 8. Protect yourself with insurance. Money management isn't just about growth, it's about protection. A single accident, illness, or disaster can wipe out years of progress. Practical habit. Make sure you have basic coverage, health insurance, car insurance, renters or homeowners insurance, and life insurance if others depend on your income. Insurance feels like an expense until the day you need it, then it feels like salvation. Lesson 9. Talk about money openly. One reason poor money habits persist is silence. Families often avoid conversations about finances out of shame or discomfort. But silence breeds ignorance, and ignorance breeds mistakes. Practical habit. Create space for open money conversations with partners, children, or trusted friends. Share goals, struggles, and strategies. Normalize financial discussions, so the next generation inherits not just money but wisdom. Lesson 10. Remember that money is a tool, not an identity. Perhaps the most important lesson is to put money in its place. Money is a tool, powerful, necessary, but not ultimate. When money becomes identity, worth rises and falls with bank balances. When money becomes purpose, life narrows to numbers. Practical habit. Regularly reflect on what money is for. Is it for freedom? For supporting loved ones? For creating opportunities? Anchoring money in purpose prevents it from controlling you. Closing reflection. Earning money without managing it is like sailing a ship without a compass. You may have strong winds, a big salary, but without direction, you'll drift into storms. The consequences are severe: debt, stress, lost opportunities, broken relationships. But the way out isn't mysterious. It's built on small, steady habits: tracking spending, budgeting, saving first, paying off debt, investing wisely, and remembering that money is a servant, not a master. The truth is, financial management is less about math and more about discipline. You don't need to be a genius, you need to be consistent. Over time, those consistent habits compound into freedom to leave a toxic job, to support family, to pursue passions, to live without fear of the next bill. In the end, the lesson is simple. Earning gives you power, but managing gives you freedom. Seeing rest as a waste of time. Roots of the problem. In our fast-paced, achievement-driven world, rest is often treated like a luxury or, worse, a weakness. We admire the hustlers who work 16-hour days. We praise those who sacrifice sleep to get ahead. We idolize productivity, and in that culture, rest feels like the enemy. But rest is not laziness. It is not wasted time. It is a biological and psychological necessity. To understand why so many of us see rest as wasted time, we need to explore the cultural, historical, and psychological forces that shape our attitudes. The legacy of the work ethic. The roots of this mistake stretch back centuries. In the United States, much of our cultural DNA comes from the Protestant work ethic, the belief that hard work is both morally good and spiritually virtuous. Generations grew up internalizing the idea that rest equals idleness, and idleness equals sin. This ethic evolved into modern capitalism's engine. Productivity equals value. Those who work the hardest, we're told, deserve the most success. Those who rest too much are labeled lazy. Even in today's secular culture, the echoes remain. We associate worth with output, and anything that doesn't contribute directly to productivity feels suspect. The rise of hustle culture. In the 21st century, this old ethic found a new expression: hustle culture. Social media is flooded with quotes like, "Rise and grind, sleep when you're dead, and, while you're resting, someone else is working." Entrepreneurs brag about sleepless nights as badges of honor. Students pull all-nighters, convinced exhaustion proves dedication. Employees wear burnout like a trophy, whispering, "I'm indispensable." This culture glorifies exhaustion and stigmatizes rest. It convinces us that rest is not part of success but an obstacle to it. In this environment, taking a nap, enjoying a slow morning, or even using all of one's vacation days feels almost rebellious. The illusion of time scarcity. Another reason rest feels wasteful is the illusion of time scarcity. People constantly say, "I don't have time," with calendars packed, emails endless, and notifications buzzing. It feels like every minute must be optimized. In such a mindset, rest looks like theft, stealing time that could be used for work, chores, or productive activities. Ironically, this mindset is self-defeating. The more we view time as scarce, the less we allow ourselves to recharge. The less we recharge, the less productive we become. But in the moment, scarcity makes rest feel like a luxury we can't afford. The influence of technology. Technology has blurred the line between work and rest. Smartphones keep us connected to emails at midnight. Remote work means the office never really closes. Social media pressures us to keep hustling, to keep performing, to keep proving ourselves. The result? Rest is crowded out. Even leisure time becomes filled with digital noise. From scrolling feeds to binge-watching shows. Activities that mimic rest but don't truly restore. Technology tricks us into thinking we're resting while our brains remain overstimulated. Psychological barriers to rest. On a personal level, many people resist rest because it forces them to confront uncomfortable truths. Work provides structure and identity. Without it, we may feel aimless or anxious. Rest requires stillness, and stillness can surface feelings we've been avoiding: loneliness, fear, or insecurity. For high achievers, rest feels like a threat to identity. If your worth is tied to output, then resting feels like worthlessness. The thought creeps in, if I'm not producing, who am I? That fear drives many to keep moving, even when their bodies beg for a pause. Cultural double standards. Interestingly, cultures around the world view rest differently. In Mediterranean countries, siestas are normal. In Japan, napping at work, called inamori, is seen as proof of dedication, not laziness. In Scandinavian countries, vacations are long and respected. But in American culture, taking extended breaks is often frowned upon. Workers leave millions of vacation days unused each year. People feel guilty for resting, worried about being seen as less committed. The double standard is clear. We admire productivity but quietly punish rest. The economic machine. Finally, let's not ignore the economic forces at play. A system built on consumerism thrives when people work more, spend more, and rest less. Advertisements push products promising to make us more efficient. Workplaces reward those who go above and beyond, often at the cost of health. Rest doesn't generate profit, unless it's packaged and sold as wellness retreats or luxury vacations. This machine convinces us to view rest not as a right but as a commodity. Something you have to earn or purchase rather than something freely available to every human body. Everyday examples. The college student who brags about pulling 3 all-nighters in a week. The young professional who skips vacation days because they fear falling behind. The entrepreneur who works every weekend, convinced that a pause will cost them success. The parent who feels guilty for sitting down to read while laundry piles up. In each case, rest is treated not as essential but as wasteful. And in each case, the result is exhaustion, irritability, and diminished effectiveness. Closing reflection. Seeing rest as wasted time is deeply ingrained in our culture. Reinforced by history, hustle culture, technology, and personal insecurities, we mistake exhaustion for dedication and stillness for laziness. But the roots of this belief are flawed. Rest is not the opposite of productivity, it is the foundation for it. The challenge is to recognize how these cultural and psychological forces shape our mindset. Only then can we begin to unlearn the lie that rest is waste. In the next section, we'll explore the very real consequences of this mistake, how neglecting rest damages not just productivity but health, relationships, and even creativity. The consequences of neglecting rest. Rest isn't optional. It isn't indulgence. It isn't weakness. It's biology. When we ignore that truth and push our bodies and minds past their natural limits, the consequences are severe. Neglecting rest doesn't just make us a little tired, it reshapes our health, our emotions, our relationships, and even the quality of the work we're so desperate to protect. Let's explore what really happens when we treat rest like a waste of time. 1. Physical health decline. The body is designed for cycles of activity and recovery. Sleep and downtime are when cells repair, muscles rebuild, and immune systems strengthen. Skipping rest is like never letting your phone recharge. Eventually, it dies. Chronic sleep deprivation and lack of rest are linked to weakened immunity, more frequent colds, slower recovery from illness, heart disease and stroke. Rest keeps blood pressure and stress hormones in check. Without it, cardiovascular risks skyrocket, obesity and diabetes. Sleep disruption affects hormones that regulate hunger, leading to overeating and weight gain. Shortened lifespan. Studies consistently show that long-term sleep deprivation shaves years off life expectancy. When people brag about running on 4 hours of sleep, what they're really saying is, I'm slowly damaging my body in ways I can't see yet. 2. Mental and emotional exhaustion. Neglecting rest doesn't just hurt the body, it unravels the mind. Without proper recovery, the brain struggles to process information, regulate emotions, and make sound decisions. The effects include memory lapses. The brain consolidates memories during sleep. Without it, recall suffers. Poor focus. Attention spans shrink, and simple tasks take longer. Irritability and mood swings. Fatigue makes us quick to anger and slow to empathy. Increased risk of depression and anxiety. Chronic rest deprivation disrupts brain chemistry, making mental health struggles far more likely. The irony is clear. Many neglect rest to stay productive, but the result is diminished performance and emotional volatility. 3. Burnout and collapse. Without rest, the body and mind eventually rebel. Burnout is the crash that follows prolonged overwork. It doesn't happen all at once, it builds quietly. A little more fatigue, a little less motivation, a little more cynicism. Then one day, it hits. People describe burnout as feeling emotionally drained, like a battery that never recharges, losing all passion for work or life, experiencing physical symptoms like headaches, stomach issues, or chronic pain. In extreme cases, burnout leads to total collapse, people fainting at desks, winding up in hospitals, or quitting jobs abruptly because they simply cannot continue. Neglecting rest doesn't just risk burnout, it guarantees it. 4. Strained relationships. Fatigue doesn't stay contained at work. It spills into our personal lives. When we're exhausted, we're less patient, less attentive, and less emotionally available. The parent who's too drained to play with their kids. The partner who snaps during minor disagreements. The friend who cancels plans again because they're too busy. Neglecting rest communicates a message. Even if unintentional, work and tasks matter more than people. Over time, that message erodes trust and intimacy. Relationships don't thrive on leftovers, and when we're always exhausted, loved ones only get the scraps. 5. Declining creativity. Rest fuels creativity. Some of the best ideas in history have come during moments of rest. Einstein while daydreaming, Newton under an apple tree, countless writers during walks or naps. Rest allows the subconscious to connect dots the conscious mind can't force. When rest is neglected, creativity suffers. Work becomes mechanical, ideas stale, innovation rare. Ironically, the very culture that glorifies constant productivity ends up producing lower quality results. 6. Mistakes and accidents. Exhaustion impairs judgment as much as alcohol. Sleep-deprived drivers are just as dangerous as drunk drivers. In workplaces, fatigue leads to errors that cost money, reputations, and sometimes lives. History offers sobering examples. The Chernobyl disaster and Challenger explosion both had links to human error fueled by fatigue. In hospitals, tired doctors and nurses make more mistakes, risking patient safety. On a smaller scale, we all know the experience: sending an embarrassing email, making a poor decision, or forgetting something important, all because we were too tired. Neglecting rest turns even capable people into liabilities. 7. Loss of joy and presence. Exhaustion steals the simple joys of life. When you're constantly drained, food tastes less vibrant, conversations feel flat, and beauty goes unnoticed. Instead of being present, you're always half asleep, always somewhere else. Rest is what allows us to savor, to laugh freely, to listen deeply, to enjoy moments fully. Without it, life becomes a blur of tasks and obligations, lived but not truly experienced. 8. Identity crisis. For high achievers, Rest often feels dangerous because it threatens identity. If worth is tied to work, then stopping feels like erasing oneself. But here's the consequence: without rest, identity narrows even further, until a person becomes nothing but their exhaustion. Over time, this erodes not just health or relationships but the very sense of who we are. People forget hobbies, passions, and dreams. They become workers, not humans. That erosion of identity may be the most tragic consequence of all. Everyday examples: the college student who collapses from exhaustion after weeks of all-nighters. The startup founder hospitalized for stress and sleep deprivation. The nurse who makes a critical mistake after a double shift. The parent too tired to enjoy family vacations, always checking emails instead. Each example is a life diminished not because of lack of effort, but because of lack of rest. Closing reflection. Neglecting rest comes with a price tag far higher than we realize. It costs health, focus, creativity, relationships, and joy. It leads to burnout, accidents, and regret. And in the cruelest twist, it sabotages the very productivity people sacrifice rest to protect. Rest isn't wasted time. It's the fuel that makes everything else possible. The question is not whether we will rest, the body will eventually force it, through collapse or illness, but whether we will choose to rest wisely before it's too late. In the next section, we'll turn to stories of people who learned this lesson the hard way, and what their experiences reveal about the necessity of rest. Stories and case studies about neglecting rest. We've looked at the roots of why rest is undervalued and the consequences of neglecting it. But perhaps nothing illustrates the truth more vividly than real stories, stories of people who drove themselves past exhaustion, ignored the signals, and paid the price. These aren't just tales of celebrities or historical figures. They're also stories of students, workers, parents, and professionals who discovered the hard way that rest is not optional. Arianna Huffington. Collapse at the top. In 2007, Arianna Huffington, co-founder of the Huffington Post, was at the height of her career. She was building a media empire, working relentless hours, and chasing success at all costs. Then one day, she collapsed in her office, hitting her head on her desk and breaking her cheekbone. The cause? Severe exhaustion from chronic sleep deprivation. That moment became a turning point. Huffington later wrote a book called The Sleep Revolution, advocating for healthier rest habits and openly admitting how wrong she had been to glorify exhaustion. Her story shows that even the most powerful people can't escape the biological limits of the body. Sleep debt will eventually collect. The medical resident crisis. Doctors are trained to save lives, but the medical profession itself has long been plagued by a toxic culture of overwork. Residents, young doctors in training, are notorious for pulling marathon shifts that last 24 to 36 hours with little sleep. The result has been countless medical errors caused by fatigue. Studies show that residents working extended shifts make 36% more serious errors than those on rested schedules. For patients, that can mean misdiagnosis, botched procedures, or worse, for the doctors themselves, it means burnout, depression, and higher suicide rates. This case study highlights the tragic irony. The very people tasked with protecting health are often forced into unhealthy patterns themselves. The trucker who fell asleep. In 2014, comedian Tracy Morgan was critically injured when a Walmart truck driver, awake for more than 24 hours, crashed into his vehicle. The accident killed one passenger and left Morgan with life-threatening injuries. This story isn't unique. Fatigue-related crashes are a major cause of accidents on highways. Truck drivers, pressured to meet deadlines and cover long distances, often push themselves beyond safe limits. The consequences are devastating, not just for themselves but for everyone sharing the road. It's a stark reminder that neglecting rest doesn't just harm individuals, it endangers entire communities. The student who broke down. College culture often normalizes all-nighters. Students brag about how little they slept, as if exhaustion proves dedication. But for many, the cost is steep. Consider Rachel, a fictional composite drawn from countless real students. She stayed up late every night cramming for exams, fueled by caffeine and stress. By the end of the semester, she was anxious, forgetful, and physically unwell. When finals hit, her body crashed. She ended up in the hospital with dehydration and extreme fatigue. Rachel's story shows how easily rest neglect becomes a cycle. Exhaustion leads to poor performance. Poor performance leads to more cramming. And the spiral continues until collapse. Elon Musk. The high cost of hustle. Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, has often spoken about working 80 to 100-hour weeks. At times, he slept on factory floors to keep up with production demands. While his work ethic is legendary, even Musk has admitted that the toll on his health and well-being has been severe. In interviews, he has confessed to breakdowns, loneliness, and exhaustion. "It's not been great for my happiness," he once said. Musk's story raises a question. What is the cost of success if it sacrifices rest, health, and personal peace? The parent who couldn't stop. Sometimes neglecting rest doesn't come from ambition but from responsibility. Maria, a single mother of two, worked 2 jobs to provide for her kids. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. She often ran on 3 or 4 hours a night. At first, she thought she was managing, but fatigue eventually caught up. She began forgetting important things, like picking her kids up on time. Her immune system weakened, and she caught every seasonal illness. Eventually, she fainted at work from sheer exhaustion. Maria's story reflects the reality for millions. Rest isn't just neglected by choice but stolen by circumstances. Her experience reminds us that societal systems must also value rest, not just individuals. Everyday neglect. These high-profile and dramatic stories are mirrored by quieter ones happening daily. The office worker who checks emails until midnight, never giving the brain a chance to shut off. The factory worker who works double shifts for extra pay, sacrificing weekends and sleep. The retiree who still feels guilty napping in the afternoon, even after a lifetime of labor. These stories may not make headlines, but they add up to a culture of exhaustion where rest is stigmatized and overwork normalized. Lessons from these stories. The common thread across all these stories is simple: the body keeps score. Whether you're a billionaire CEO, a truck driver, a student, or a parent, neglecting rest catches up. These stories teach us exhaustion is universal. No one is immune. No matter their wealth, talent, or ambition, rest denial leads to crisis, collapse. Accidents, errors, and illnesses are inevitable. Cultural change is needed. Industries like medicine and trucking show that systems, not just individuals, must value rest. It's never too late to change, as Arianna Huffington demonstrated. Collapse can lead to transformation if lessons are embraced. Closing reflection. Stories give us more than warnings, they give us perspective. They remind us that exhaustion is not strength, and collapse is not a badge of honor. The world often applauds hustle, but bodies and minds don't. Every story of neglect, from executives to students, from celebrities to parents, whispers the same truth: rest is not wasted time. It is the foundation of everything else. The real waste is a life cut short, relationships strained, or creativity stifled because we believed the lie that stopping made us weak. In the next section, we'll turn to solutions, the lessons and practical habits that can help us reclaim rest as an essential, life-giving practice. Lessons and practical habits for rest. We've seen why people dismiss rest, the consequences of neglecting it, and the stories of those who learned too late. Now comes the most important part. How do we reclaim rest as a necessity, not a luxury? The truth is that rest isn't about laziness, it's about sustainability. It's what makes growth possible. Rest is the soil in which productivity, creativity, and joy take root. In this section, we'll explore lessons and practical habits to help build a healthier relationship with rest. Lesson 1. Redefine rest as productive. One of the biggest barriers to rest is the belief that it's wasted time. But science tells a different story. Rest fuels performance. Athletes understand this intuitively. Muscles don't grow during training, they grow during recovery. The same is true for the brain. Practical habit. Change the language you use. Instead of saying, "I wasted the afternoon napping," say, "I invested in recharging." Instead of thinking, "I lost time by taking Sunday off," say, "I prepared myself for the week ahead." Language shapes perspective, and perspective shapes behavior. Lesson 2. Prioritize sleep as non-negotiable. Sleep is the foundation of rest. It's not optional, it's as essential as food and water. Yet it's often the first thing sacrificed when schedules get busy. Practical habit. Create a consistent sleep routine. Go to bed and wake up at the same times. Even on weekends. Limit screen time an hour before bed. Blue light disrupts melatonin production. Make your room dark, cool, and quiet. Treat sleep like an appointment you can't miss, because your future depends on it. Lesson 3. Schedule rest intentionally. Rest won't happen by accident. In a world that glorifies busyness, you must plan it the way you plan meetings or workouts. Practical habit. Block rest appointments in your calendar. This could be a daily walk, a weekly afternoon nap, or a monthly day of unplugging. Protect these appointments as fiercely as you would a work deadline. Over time, your calendar will reflect not just your responsibilities but your humanity. Lesson 4. Embrace micro rests. Rest doesn't always mean long vacations or 8-hour nights of sleep, though those are important. Sometimes rest is about small, intentional pauses throughout the day. Practical habit. Practice the Pomodoro technique. Work for 25 minutes. Then rest for 5. Stand, stretch, breathe deeply, or simply stare out a window. These micro rests reset your focus and prevent fatigue from compounding. Lesson 5. Unplug to truly recharge. Scrolling social media or binge-watching shows might feel like rest, but often they overstimulate rather than restore. True rest involves stepping away from constant noise. Practical habit. Choose one period each day to unplug completely. Put your phone in another room. Read a physical book. Take a walk. Meditate. Or journal. Let your brain experience quiet. It may feel uncomfortable at first, silence often does, but that discomfort is a sign of detox from overstimulation. Lesson 6. Incorporate active rest. Rest doesn't always mean stillness. Activities like walking, yoga, gardening, or light stretching provide active rest, restorative movements that refresh both body and mind. Practical habit. Build one active rest practice into your routine. Take a 20-minute walk after dinner. Try restorative yoga once a week. Do light stretching while listening to calming music. These practices release tension and boost energy without draining you. Lesson 7. Use rest to nurture creativity. Rest isn't just about avoiding burnout, it's about sparking inspiration. The brain connects ideas most effectively when relaxed. That's why so many breakthroughs happen in the shower, on walks, or during naps. Practical habit. Create intentional, mind-wandering time. Take a walk without headphones. Sit in a park without an agenda. Let your brain drift. Keep a notebook handy. You may be surprised at the ideas that surface when you stop forcing them. Lesson 8. Respect weekly rhythms. Across cultures and religions, humans have long recognized the wisdom of weekly rest, from the Sabbath to the modern weekend. These traditions aren't just spiritual, they're practical. Regular rhythms of work and rest prevent burnout. Practical habit. Designate one day, or even half a day, each week as sacred rest. No work emails, no chores beyond essentials. Use it for family, hobbies, or stillness. Over time, this rhythm builds resilience for the week ahead. Lesson 9. Practice rest without guilt. Many people struggle to rest not because they can't, but because they feel guilty when they do. They hear the inner voice saying, "You should be working. You're wasting time." That guilt steals the very benefit of rest. Practical habit. When guilt arises, remind yourself, rest is part of the work. Write it on a sticky note if needed. Rest doesn't detract from productivity, it multiplies it. Guilt-free rest restores energy so you can return stronger. Lesson 10. Model and share healthy rest. Rest is contagious. When leaders, parents, or role models demonstrate healthy rest habits, others feel permission to do the same. Conversely, when they glorify exhaustion, they perpetuate the cycle. Practical habit. If you're in a leadership role, encourage your team to take breaks and vacations. If you're a parent, let your children see you rest without guilt. If you're a friend, normalize turning down plans when you need downtime. By modeling rest, you help shift culture one circle at a time. Closing reflection. Rest is not the absence of work, it is what makes work possible. It is not wasted time, it is the time that restores our humanity. Without it, health declines, relationships strain, and creativity withers. With it, we flourish. The lessons are simple but profound. Redefine rest as productive. Prioritize sleep. Schedule pauses. Unplug from noise. Practice active rest. Nurture creativity. Honor weekly rhythms. Release guilt. And model balance for others. In a culture that idolizes hustle, choosing rest is an act of courage. But it is also an act of wisdom. Rest doesn't steal from success, it sustains it. And the sooner we embrace that truth, the sooner we can live lives that are not just busy, but whole. Letting perfectionism block progress. Roots of the problem. On the surface, perfectionism sounds like a strength. Who wouldn't want to strive for the best? Who wouldn't admire the person who demands excellence? Who refuses to settle for good enough? But beneath that shiny exterior lies a trap. Perfectionism often paralyzes more than it empowers. It makes people afraid to start, afraid to finish, and afraid to fail. Instead of fueling growth, it blocks progress. To understand why perfectionism has such a hold on so many of us, we need to look at its roots: cultural, psychological, and personal. Because perfectionism doesn't come out of nowhere. It's planted in us through messages we hear, experiences we live, and fears we internalize. The cultural ideal of flawlessness. Modern culture is obsessed with flawless images. We scroll through Instagram feeds full of curated photos, skin without blemishes, homes without clutter, careers without setbacks. Advertisers bombard us with promises of perfect skin, perfect bodies, perfect lifestyles. Movies and TV shows often portray neat storylines where problems are resolved neatly within an hour. The message is constant. Perfect is possible. And anything less is failure. This cultural backdrop makes perfectionism almost inevitable. We learn to fear imperfection not just as a flaw, but as evidence that we don't measure up. The school system and early conditioning. For many, perfectionism begins in school. From the first graded assignment, children learn that mistakes equal deductions, and deductions equal lower worth. Gold stars, A+ papers, and honor rolls reward flawless performance, while errors are circled in red ink. By the time kids grow into teenagers, many have internalized the lesson. Mistakes are shameful. Instead of seeing failure as part of learning, they see it as proof of inadequacy. By adulthood, this conditioning becomes second nature. Family expectations. Families also play a powerful role. For some, parents unintentionally nurture perfectionism by setting impossibly high standards. A child who hears, "Why didn't you get 100?" instead of, "Great job on your 95 inches," quickly learns that near perfect isn't good enough. Even well-meaning praise can reinforce perfectionism. Telling a child, "You're the smart one," or "You're the talented one," may motivate. But it also pressures. The child feels they must constantly prove the label true, which means avoiding mistakes at all costs. The fear of judgment. Perfectionism is often rooted in fear of criticism, rejection, or humiliation. We imagine others are watching closely, waiting for us to stumble. Social media amplifies this fear. Every post feels like a performance. Every achievement a public record. Every flaw a potential embarrassment. This fear turns mistakes into monsters. Instead of risking imperfection, perfectionists often delay projects endlessly, revise obsessively, or avoid challenges altogether. The illusion of control. Perfectionism also comes from a desire for control. Life is messy and unpredictable, but perfectionists cling to the illusion that if they just do everything flawlessly, they can avoid pain, rejection, or failure. The irony is that perfectionism doesn't prevent pain, it often creates it. The pursuit of flawlessness drains joy, fuels anxiety, and keeps people stuck in cycles of overthinking. Personality traits and temperament. Some people are naturally more prone to perfectionism. High achievers, sensitive individuals, and those with analytical minds often gravitate toward exactness. These traits aren't bad, they can fuel excellence. But without balance, they tilt into unhealthy perfectionism. Psychologists distinguish between healthy striving and maladaptive perfectionism. Healthy striving pushes us to do our best while accepting imperfection. Maladaptive perfectionism ties self-worth to performance and fears failure so deeply it blocks growth. The difference is subtle but crucial. Societal competition. In competitive societies, perfectionism is almost a survival strategy. College admissions, job markets, and promotions often seem to reward only the best. When opportunities feel scarce, People believe they must be flawless to succeed. This belief is reinforced by stories of geniuses and prodigies who appear perfect from the start. We rarely see their messy drafts, failed experiments, or years of practice. Instead, we see the polished final product and assume that's what success requires. Everyday examples of perfectionism's roots. The student who won't submit an essay until it's rewritten 10 times. Terrified of losing points. The artist who never shares their work because it doesn't look like the masterpieces they admire online. The employee who delays presentations because the slides don't feel perfect yet. The parent who exhausts themselves trying to create picture-perfect holidays for their kids, forgetting that presence matters more than polish. These examples show how perfectionism isn't limited to big achievements, it sneaks into daily life, slowing progress and stealing peace. The double-edged sword. It's important to recognize that perfectionism often starts from a good place. The desire to excel, to avoid mistakes, to meet high standards, these can all be positive motivators. But when taken too far, they become shackles. The double-edged sword looks like this. Healthy striving says, I want to do my best, and I accept that mistakes are part of learning. Perfectionism says, if I make a mistake, I am a failure. This difference determines whether ambition propels growth or blocks it. Closing reflection. Perfectionism has deep roots, cultural ideals of flawlessness, school conditioning, family expectations, fear of judgment, desire for control, competitive pressures, and natural personality traits. Each root plants the same seed, the belief that being less than perfect is unacceptable. The tragedy is that this belief stops progress before it starts. Projects sit unfinished, dreams remain unpursued, joy is replaced with anxiety. The challenge is to recognize these roots and name them for what they are: illusions. Perfection is not possible, and chasing it only delays the progress that truly matters. In the next section, we'll look at the consequences of letting perfectionism take over. What happens when the pursuit of flawlessness becomes a prison? The consequences of perfectionism. Perfectionism promises excellence but often delivers paralysis. It whispers, if you just try harder, polish more, wait longer, you'll finally get it right. But the reality is crueler. Projects stall, anxiety grows, and life shrinks under the weight of impossible standards. Let's explore the consequences of perfectionism, not just in theory, but in the way it affects our health, relationships, and dreams. 1. Paralysis and procrastination. Perfectionists often struggle to start projects. Why? Because starting means risking imperfection. The blank page feels safer than a draft that might fall short. The idea remains pristine in the mind, unsullied by reality. This leads to procrastination disguised as preparation. Endless research, excessive planning, countless revisions. The perfectionist tells themselves, I'm not ready yet, but ready never comes. As a result, dreams remain unlaunched and opportunities pass by. 2. Projects left unfinished. Even when perfectionists do start, finishing is another battle. Because no product, no performance, no project ever feels flawless. Many stay stuck in the almost done stage. Books sit half-written. Businesses linger in pre-launch mode. Presentations get revised until the deadline forces submission. Instead of progress, perfectionism creates limbo. Work that's always in motion but never complete. 3. Anxiety and mental strain. Living under perfectionism is exhausting. The constant pressure to meet impossible standards fuels anxiety, stress, and burnout. Perfectionists often report racing thoughts, overanalysis, and inability to relax. Even small mistakes can trigger spirals of self-criticism. How could I be so stupid? I'll never get this right. Over time, this inner critic becomes relentless, eroding self-esteem and feeding depression. The mind becomes a battlefield, every flaw magnified out of proportion. 4. Damaged self-worth. Perfectionism ties self-worth to performance. Success brings temporary relief, but failure, or even mediocrity, feels like personal annihilation. This fragile sense of worth means perfectionists are constantly riding emotional roller coasters. One day, they feel validated by praise. The next, they collapse under criticism. Instead of developing resilience, they remain brittle, shattering easily under pressure. 5. Strained relationships. Perfectionism doesn't just affect the individual, it spills into relationships. Perfectionists often impose their high standards on others. Whether intentionally or not, partners, children, friends, and coworkers may feel judged, pressured, or never good enough. This can create resentment. Spouses who feel criticized, children who feel suffocated, colleagues who avoid collaboration. Over time, perfectionism isolates. Instead of drawing people closer, it pushes them away. 6. Fear of taking risks. Because perfectionists dread failure, they often avoid risks altogether. They stick to what they know they can excel at, shunning opportunities that might expose them to mistakes. This limits growth. Careers stagnate because promotions require risk-taking. Creativity dries up because innovation requires experimentation. Personal lives shrink because new hobbies, relationships, or adventures feel too risky. The perfectionist's world becomes smaller and safer, but also emptier. 7. Reduced productivity. Ironically, perfectionism often reduces productivity. Time that could be spent completing multiple tasks gets consumed by obsessing over minor details. The perfectionist spends hours perfecting a font choice instead of finishing the report, or rewriting an email 10 times instead of sending it. What looks like diligence is actually inefficiency. The quest for flawless results means fewer results overall. Employers and teams often notice this, leading to frustration or missed opportunities. 8. Health problems. Chronic perfectionism doesn't just weigh on the mind, it wears down the body. The stress of constant pressure triggers physical issues, headaches and migraines, stomach problems or digestive issues, insomnia, high blood pressure, weakened immunity. In severe cases, perfectionism is linked to eating disorders, obsessive-compulsive behaviors, and even heart disease. The body carries the burden of the perfectionist's relentless standards. 9. Loss of joy. Perhaps the saddest consequence is the loss of joy. Perfectionists rarely allow themselves to celebrate achievements because nothing feels good enough. Even milestones are met with criticism. I did well, but I could have done better. This mindset robs life of satisfaction. Vacations are overshadowed by planning. Achievements feel hollow. Everyday moments go unappreciated because they're never perfect. Life becomes a checklist of flaws instead of a celebration of progress. 10. The trap of endless comparison. Perfectionists constantly compare themselves to others, and always come up short. Someone else is smarter, richer, more talented, more successful. Instead of motivating, this comparison deepens feelings of inadequacy. The perfectionist's life becomes a race with no finish line, measured against standards that are not only unrealistic but constantly shifting. Real-world illustrations. The artist who never shares her work because she fears it's not masterpiece level. The entrepreneur who delays launching a product for years, missing the market entirely. The student who avoids classes they might not ace, limiting their education. The parent who spends weeks creating perfect birthday parties but is too stressed to enjoy them. Each example shows how perfectionism blocks progress and drains joy. The double loss. Perfectionism costs us twice. We lose progress because we never finish or even start. We lose peace because even when we succeed, we don't let ourselves enjoy it. It's a life of constant striving without satisfaction, constant effort without rest. Closing reflection. Perfectionism pretends to be a friend, whispering that it will help us achieve greatness. But in reality, it is a thief, stealing time, health, joy, relationships, and progress. Its consequences are not abstract. They are lived daily by millions who feel stuck in endless cycles of striving without satisfaction. The challenge is not to abandon excellence but to embrace progress. To understand that mistakes are part of growth. And that, done, often beats perfect. In the next section, we'll look at stories of people who lived in the grip of perfectionism, and how some broke free. Stories and case studies of perfectionism. Perfectionism doesn't just live in psychology textbooks. It lives in boardrooms, classrooms, art studios, kitchens, and homes. It's the student paralyzed before a blank page, the entrepreneur stuck in endless revisions, the parent exhausted from impossible standards. To truly understand how perfectionism blocks progress, it helps to look at real lives, some famous, some ordinary, but all echoing the same theme. The relentless pursuit of flawless results often leads to disappointment. Burnout. or missed opportunities. Steve Jobs. Genius and the shadow of perfectionism. Steve Jobs is remembered as one of the greatest innovators of the modern era. He revolutionized technology with the iPhone, iPad, and Macintosh. But behind the genius was a perfectionist streak so intense it sometimes blocked progress. Jobs was known to obsess over the smallest details. Stories circulate of him demanding that even the inside of a computer, which consumers would never see, look beautiful. At times, his insistence on perfect design delayed product launches and frustrated engineers. While his standards led to groundbreaking innovation, they also created friction and burnout among his teams. Jobs' story shows the double-edged sword of perfectionism. It can drive excellence, but it can also stall progress and strain relationships. The writer who never published. Consider Anna, an aspiring novelist. She had been working on her manuscript for nearly a decade. Every time she finished a draft, she found flaws. She rewrote sentences endlessly, restructured chapters repeatedly, and convinced herself the story wasn't ready. Her friends encouraged her to publish, but she always replied, "It's not perfect yet." Years passed. Other writers she knew, some less talented, published books, built audiences, and grew as artists. Anna, still chasing perfection, remained unpublished. Her story illustrates the silent tragedy of perfectionism. How many voices remain unheard? How many stories untold? Because their creators feared imperfection. The student who burned out. Michael was a top student in high school. Straight A's, extracurriculars, leadership roles. His identity was built on flawless achievement. When he entered a prestigious university, he carried the same mindset. But the workload was heavier, the competition fiercer. Michael responded by doubling down. He studied until 3 a.m., rewrote essays multiple times, and obsessed over every grade. At first, it worked. Then exhaustion hit. Anxiety attacks began. Eventually, Michael dropped out for a semester to recover. Michael's story reflects a common pattern among high-achieving students. Perfectionism that once fueled success becomes a weight too heavy to carry. The pursuit of flawless performance leads not to triumph but to collapse. The entrepreneur who never launched. Sophia dreamed of starting a business. She designed a product, built prototypes, and created a website, but she couldn't bring herself to launch. Every time she reviewed her work, she saw flaws. The logo wasn't polished. The website needed tweaking. The product could be refined. Years later, her idea was still sitting on her hard drive. Meanwhile, other entrepreneurs launched similar products. Some rough around the edges, but they improved over time. They grew because they started. Sophia stayed stuck because she wanted her launch to be flawless. Her story reveals the harsh reality in business. Done beats perfect. The market rewards action, not endless revision. The parent who tried too hard. Laura wanted to be the perfect mom. She baked elaborate cupcakes for every school event, created Pinterest-worthy birthday parties, and tried to maintain a spotless home while balancing work. On the outside, she looked like she had it all together. Inside, she was exhausted and resentful. Her children didn't notice the difference between store-bought cupcakes and homemade ones. What they craved was time with her, not perfection in presentation. Laura's story highlights how perfectionism can distort priorities. By chasing flawless appearances, she missed opportunities for genuine connection. The artist who froze. David was a painter with extraordinary talent, but his perfectionism made creating unbearable. Every time he stood before a canvas, he feared the first brushstroke wouldn't be good enough. So he delayed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. His studio filled with blank canvases, silent monuments to his paralysis. David's story shows how perfectionism kills creativity. Art, by nature, is messy and imperfect. By demanding flawlessness, he silenced his own voice. The everyday worker. Not all perfectionism is dramatic. Sometimes it shows up in quiet, draining ways. The employee who spends hours tweaking fonts and colors on a presentation instead of focusing on content. The manager who micromanages every detail of their team's work, slowing projects and suffocating creativity. The coworker who stays late every night, terrified of submitting anything less than flawless. These stories may not make headlines, but they represent millions of people stuck in cycles of overwork and underfulfillment. Lessons from these stories. Across these case studies, Patterns emerge. Perfectionism delays action. Anna never published. Sophia never launched. David never painted. Perfectionism drains health. Michael burned out. Laura exhausted herself. Perfectionism strains relationships. Jobs' genius was undeniable, but his standards often created conflict. Perfectionism shrinks life. Instead of expanding, exploring, and enjoying, perfectionists live smaller, safer, and sadder lives. These stories don't condemn high standards. Excellence matters, but excellence is achieved through progress, iteration, and learning, not through waiting for perfection. A note of hope. Not every story of perfectionism ends in tragedy. Many people learn to break free. Arianna Huffington turned her collapse into a revolution for rest. Countless writers eventually accept imperfection and publish, discovering that readers connect more with authenticity than polish. Entrepreneurs who once hesitated launch imperfectly and grow stronger through feedback. The hopeful truth is this: perfectionism can be unlearned. The stories of failure are warnings, but they're also invitations to choose differently. Closing reflection. Stories cut through abstraction. They show us what perfectionism looks like when it's lived out, the books unwritten, the businesses unlaunched, the children missing presents, the artists silenced, the workers drained. The lesson is clear. Perfectionism doesn't protect us, it robs us. It robs us of time, energy, relationships, and the joy of creating. The alternative isn't mediocrity, it's progress. It's choosing to start, to finish, to share, even when the result isn't flawless. In the next section, we'll focus on how to make that shift. The lessons and practical habits that help us overcome perfectionism and embrace progress over perfection. Lessons and practical habits for overcoming perfectionism. We've explored the roots of perfectionism, the consequences, and the stories of people caught in its grip. Now comes the most important part. How do we break free? The goal isn't to abandon excellence but to redefine it. True excellence comes not from flawless execution, but from consistent progress, authentic effort, and the courage to try. Let's look at lessons and practical habits that can help us overcome perfectionism and reclaim joy in the process. Lesson 1. Redefine success as progress. Perfectionism thrives when success is defined as flawless. To break free, redefine success as progress. Did you take a step forward today? Did you try something new? Did you finish, even if it wasn't perfect? That's success. Practical habit. At the end of each day, write down one way you made progress. Keep a progress journal where effort, not perfection, is celebrated. Over time, this rewires your brain to value movement over stagnation. Lesson 2. Set good enough standards. Sometimes perfectionists never finish because they don't know when to stop. A solution is to create good enough standards in advance. Define what a finished product looks like before you start, and commit to stopping when you reach it. Practical habit. Use deadlines. Tell yourself, I'll revise this paper twice, then submit it, or I'll spend 2 hours on this design, then it's done. By presetting boundaries, you protect yourself from endless tinkering. Lesson 3. Practice self-compassion. Perfectionism thrives on harsh self-criticism. The antidote is compassion. Instead of berating yourself for mistakes, treat yourself the way you'd treat a friend, with encouragement and kindness. Practical habit. When you catch yourself saying, I'm such an idiot, pause and reframe. I made a mistake, but I'm learning. Keep a list of self-compassionate phrases nearby to remind yourself that growth matters more than flawlessness. Lesson 4. Normalize mistakes. Mistakes aren't proof of failure, they're proof of effort. Every successful person has failed repeatedly. But perfectionism hides this truth. To overcome it, normalize mistakes as part of the journey. Practical habit. Create a failure resume. Write down mistakes you've made and what you learned from each. Review it often as a reminder that failure is a teacher, not an enemy. Lesson 5. Share imperfectly. Perfectionism often keeps work hidden. The cure is exposure. Sharing before you feel ready. This breaks the illusion that everything must be flawless before it's seen. Practical habit. Post a rough draft online. Share a project with a trusted friend before it's polished. Present an idea even if it feels incomplete. Each time you share, you weaken the grip of perfectionism. Lesson 6. Focus on process, not outcome. Perfectionists obsess over results. Shifting focus to process relieves pressure. When the joy is in creating, not in the final product, imperfection feels less threatening. Practical habit. Choose hobbies where outcome doesn't matter: painting, gardening, cooking, playing music. Do them badly, on purpose, just for fun. This trains you to enjoy process over product. Lesson 7. Limit comparisons. Comparison fuels perfectionism. Someone is always richer, smarter, more talented. The way out is to limit exposure and shift perspective. Practical habit. Reduce time on social media, especially accounts that trigger inadequacy. Instead, follow creators who share authentically, flaws included. Practice gratitude daily to remind yourself of what you already have. Lesson 8. Celebrate small wins. Perfectionists rarely celebrate achievements, they immediately focus on what could have been better. To counter this, celebrate small wins deliberately. Practical habit. Create a ritual of recognition. After completing a task, no matter how small, pause to acknowledge it. Say, "That's done, great job." Over time, celebration becomes a habit that balances the inner critic. Lesson 9. Build a supportive environment. Breaking free from perfectionism is easier with community. Surround yourself with people who value authenticity over polish, who encourage risk-taking and celebrate effort. Practical habit. Join groups or communities where vulnerability is safe: writing circles, creative workshops, support groups. Share struggles openly and invite accountability partners who remind you to let go of impossible standards. Lesson 10. Practice imperfection intentionally. One of the most powerful habits is to deliberately do something imperfect and sit with the discomfort. This retrains your brain to realize that imperfection doesn't equal disaster. Practical habit. Send an email without obsessing over every word. Cook a meal without following the recipe perfectly. Post a photo without editing it. Each small act of intentional imperfection chips away at the fear that fuels perfectionism. Lesson 11. Anchor identity beyond performance. Perfectionism ties worth to achievement. To break free, anchor identity in deeper values. You are not your grades, job titles, or polished outputs. You are more. Practical habit. Write a personal values statement. Identify 3 qualities you want to embody: kindness, curiosity, resilience. Measure yourself daily by those values, not by external outcomes. Lesson 12. Seek professional help when needed. For some, perfectionism becomes so ingrained it leads to anxiety, depression, or obsessive-compulsive behaviors. In those cases, therapy or counseling can provide tools to break free. Practical habit. If perfectionism feels overwhelming, seek support from a therapist. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, in particular, has proven effective in challenging perfectionistic thought patterns. Closing reflection. Perfectionism isn't defeated in one day. It's a lifelong practice of choosing progress over paralysis, compassion over criticism, and courage over fear. The lessons and habits we've explored: redefining success, normalizing mistakes, sharing imperfectly, enjoying the process, celebrating small wins, anchoring identity and values, are not quick fixes, but they are powerful antidotes. The truth is, life isn't perfect. It was never meant to be. And that's good news, because it means we don't have to be perfect either. What matters is that we show up, try, learn, and keep moving forward. Progress beats perfection every single time. Overcommitting to others while neglecting yourself. Roots of the problem. On the surface, putting others first seems noble. Society often praises the selfless friend, the tireless parent, the dedicated employee who never says no. We admire sacrifice. We applaud generosity. But when giving turns into overgiving, when boundaries disappear and self-care vanishes, the result is not virtue but depletion. Overcommitting to others while neglecting yourself is one of the most common and misunderstood mistakes people make. To see why it happens, we need to dig into its roots: cultural expectations, family patterns, personality traits, and deep psychological needs. Cultural messages of self-sacrifice. From a young age, many of us are taught that good people put others first. Movies glorify the hero who sacrifices everything for others. Religious teachings often emphasize service, sometimes interpreted as neglecting one's own needs. In workplaces, employees who go above and beyond are praised. even when it means burnout. The cultural script is clear. Saying yes makes you kind. Saying no makes you selfish. Over time, this script conditions us to equate self-worth with how much we give away. Family expectations and early conditioning. Family dynamics often play a major role. Some children grow up in households where they're praised for being helpful, but criticized for asserting their own needs. Others may take on caretaker roles early, looking after siblings, soothing parents' emotions, or managing household tasks. This early conditioning can turn into adulthood patterns, constantly prioritizing others, fearing disapproval, and feeling guilty for taking time for oneself. What starts as survival in childhood becomes habit in maturity. People-pleasing tendencies. At the psychological level, many who overcommit are natural people pleasers. They crave harmony, validation, and connection. Saying yes feels like a way to maintain approval and avoid conflict. But people-pleasing often comes at the expense of authenticity. Instead of making choices from genuine desire, decisions are made from fear. If I say no, will they still like me? The desire to be needed. Being needed feels good. It creates a sense of importance and purpose. For some, helping others becomes the main source of identity. They fear that if they stop giving, they'll stop mattering. This creates a cycle where self-worth is tied to service, even when it drains energy. Fear of rejection or abandonment. For many, the inability to set boundaries stems from fear. Saying no feels risky. What if the person rejects me, judges me, or leaves me? This fear can be especially strong in relationships where love or approval once felt conditional. To avoid rejection, people say yes, over and over, even when it costs them dearly. Gender roles and social expectations. Cultural gender roles often intensify this problem. Women, in particular, are frequently expected to be caregivers, nurturers, and peacemakers. Saying no may be judged more harshly for them than for men. Men, on the other hand, may feel pressure to provide and protect, often at the expense of their own needs. Both face societal scripts that reward overcommitment and shame boundaries. Workplace dynamics. In professional environments, overcommitting can look like taking on extra projects, staying late, or covering for colleagues. Many employees fear that setting boundaries will make them look lazy, uncooperative, or less promotable. Bosses sometimes exploit this fear, rewarding those who never push back. Over time, this workplace culture normalizes self-neglect. Burnout is reframed as dedication, and exhaustion becomes a twisted badge of honor. Technology and constant availability. In the age of smartphones, boundaries are harder to enforce. Texts, emails, and notifications make it easy for people to reach us anytime. The pressure to respond instantly adds to the feeling that we must always be available. Saying no becomes harder when yes can be delivered with a quick tap. Everyday examples of overcommitment. The friend who agrees to help everyone move, babysit, or run errands, even when exhausted. The employee who stays late every night covering others' work. The parent who pours every ounce of energy into kids' schedules, leaving no time for self-care. The volunteer who signs up for every committee but feels secretly resentful and drained. Each case reflects the same dynamic: boundaries missing, self-neglect thriving, the double standard of self-care. One reason this mistake persists is the double standard around self-care. When others take breaks, we often cheer them on. Good for you. You deserve it. But when it's us, we feel guilty. Somehow, we believe others earn rest, but we must earn it 10 times over. This hypocrisy reveals how deeply ingrained the idea of self-neglect has become. The illusion of endless capacity. Overcommitment also thrives on the illusion that we can always handle it. We assume energy, health, and time are unlimited. We think, I'll just push through, I'll rest later. But capacity is not infinite. Ignoring limits doesn't expand them, it depletes them faster. Closing reflection. The roots of overcommitting to others while neglecting yourself are tangled. Cultural scripts of self-sacrifice. Family conditioning. People-pleasing tendencies. The desire to be needed. Fear of rejection. Workplace exploitation. And the illusion of endless capacity. Each root grows into the same outcome. Lives where saying yes feels mandatory and saying no feels impossible. But here's the truth. Neglecting yourself doesn't serve anyone in the long run. An empty cup cannot pour. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. In the next section, we'll explore what happens when we fail to learn that lesson, the consequences of living a life of constant overcommitment. The consequences of overcommitting to others. Saying yes too often feels harmless in the moment. A small favor here, an extra project there, another responsibility squeezed into an already crowded calendar. But over time, the cost of overcommitting is steep. When we constantly give without replenishing, we don't just exhaust ourselves, we damage our health, our relationships, and even our ability to help effectively. Let's explore the real consequences of living a life where yes always outruns no. 1. Physical exhaustion and burnout. The most immediate cost of overcommitment is exhaustion. Bodies have limits, and when those limits are ignored, burnout follows. Burnout shows up as chronic fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, frequent headaches, digestive issues, or muscle pain, weakened immunity, leading to constant colds or illnesses. Insomnia, as the mind spins with unfinished tasks. At first, people push through. They tell themselves, I just need a vacation. But when vacations are filled with obligations too, the cycle never breaks. Burnout is not a badge of honor, it's a warning light on the dashboard. 2. Mental and emotional drain. Overcommitting doesn't just sap physical energy, it drains emotional reserves. When you're constantly on, anxiety rises, irritability increases, and joy diminishes. People often describe feeling like they're running on fumes, technically functioning, but hollow inside. Over time, this emotional drain can lead to resentment toward those you're helping, guilt when you finally say no, depression from feeling trapped in a cycle of obligation, loss of identity, as personal dreams and passions are buried under everyone else's needs. 3. Decreased quality of help. Ironically, saying yes to everyone doesn't help everyone. When energy is spread too thin, quality suffers. The parent who tries to attend every school event may show up physically but not emotionally. The employee who takes on too many projects delivers mediocre results instead of excellence. By overcommitting, we dilute the very care we want to provide. Instead of being fully present for a few important things, we become half present for everything. 4. Strained relationships. Relationships thrive on balance, give and take. But when one person constantly gives while neglecting themselves, imbalance grows. Spouses may feel ignored, children may sense resentment, friends may feel used. Overcommitting also creates hidden tension. People who always say yes often expect unspoken gratitude or reciprocity. When it doesn't come, bitterness builds. The relationship becomes a silent scorecard. After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me. 5. Loss of boundaries and identity. Over time, constant overcommitment erodes boundaries. People no longer know where they end and others begin. Their schedule, emotions, and even identity are controlled by external demands. This loss of boundaries leads to identity crises. Who am I apart from what others need? What do I even want? If I'm always focused on others' wants, without space for self-discovery, identity shrinks to caretaker, helper, fixer, but not whole person. 6. Missed opportunities for growth. Saying yes to everything often means saying no to what matters most. When every ounce of energy goes to serving others, little remains for personal growth, dreams, or passions. The employee who always covers for coworkers misses chances for advancement. The artist who spends weekends helping friends move never paints. The parent who sacrifices all hobbies for kids forgets what used to bring them joy. By overcommitting, people unintentionally rob themselves of opportunities that could enrich their own lives. 7. Physical health consequences. Self-neglect eventually shows up in health. Exercise is skipped, meals become rushed, doctor appointments are postponed, stress hormones remain elevated, leading to long-term damage. Consequences include weight gain or loss from poor eating habits, chronic stress-related illnesses like hypertension or ulcers, higher risk of heart disease, shortened lifespan. Ironically, by sacrificing health to serve others, people often reduce their ability to keep serving in the long run. 8. Perpetuating unhealthy dynamics. Overcommitting not only harms the giver but also enables unhealthy behavior in others. When someone always says yes, others stop respecting boundaries. They learn to expect constant availability. Children raised with this pattern may grow up entitled, never learning to appreciate limits. Colleagues may become dependent instead of responsible. By never saying no, we don't just hurt ourselves, we teach others to take advantage, even unintentionally. 9. Hidden resentment and explosive conflict. Overcommitment breeds silent resentment. People bottle frustration because they don't want to disappoint. But emotions don't disappear, they build pressure. Eventually, resentment erupts in explosive arguments or passive-aggressive behaviors. The irony is clear. People overcommit to avoid conflict. But in the end, it often creates bigger conflicts. 10. Spiritual and existential emptiness. Beyond physical and relational costs, overcommitment can create a sense of emptiness. When life is spent constantly serving others without space for rest or purpose, the question emerges, what about me? This isn't selfishness, it's humanity. Every person needs meaning beyond obligation. Without it, life feels mechanical, a series of tasks performed for others, rather than a journey of personal growth, joy, and contribution. Everyday illustrations. The overworked nurse who takes every shift, neglecting her own health, until burnout forces her to quit. The generous friend who says yes to everyone's requests, only to feel invisible when no one asks how she's doing. The employee praised for always taking on extra tasks, yet overlooked for promotions because leadership sees them as support staff, rather than a leader. The parent who gives endlessly but secretly resents the lack of appreciation. Each example shows the paradox. By trying to give more, we often end up giving less, and losing ourselves in the process. Closing reflection. The consequences of overcommitting are not noble. They're destructive. They drain health, joy, relationships, and purpose. They don't just harm the giver, they harm the very people the giver is trying to serve. The truth is simple. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're the framework that makes generosity sustainable. In the next section, we'll look at real stories, people who lived the cycle of overcommitment, some who collapsed under it, and others who found healthier balance. Stories and case studies of overcommitting to others. The theory of overcommitment makes sense in abstract terms, but stories reveal its true cost. They show us how real people, from parents and professionals to leaders and caregivers, have sacrificed too much for too long, often at great personal expense. Some stories end in collapse, while others end in hard-earned wisdom. All of them remind us that generosity without boundaries is unsustainable. The nurse who couldn't say no. Nursing is one of the most demanding professions, and it often attracts people with strong caregiving instincts. That was the case for Emily, a hospital nurse known for her kindness. Whenever a colleague needed a shift covered, Emily volunteered. When patients needed extra care, she stayed late. At first, she was admired for her dedication. But after years of saying yes, Emily began to unravel. She was constantly tired, her health declined, and her family barely saw her. Eventually, she collapsed during a shift from sheer exhaustion. Emily's story is common in caregiving professions. The desire to help is noble, but without boundaries, even the best caregivers burn out, leaving both themselves and their patients at risk. The parent who gave everything. David was a single father raising 2 kids, determined to give them the best. He worked overtime, coached sports, volunteered at school, and never missed an activity. To his children, he seemed like a superhero. To himself, he felt constantly depleted. One day, his teenage son said, "Dad, you don't have to do everything. We just want you to be here." That simple statement broke him. David realized that in trying to give his kids everything, he was giving them a version of himself that was tired, distracted, and stressed. His story illustrates the hidden truth. Children don't need perfect parents who do it all. They need present parents who have energy and joy to share. The employee trapped by yes. Sophia was the go-to person in her office. Need someone to take on extra tasks? Ask Sophia. Need a last-minute presentation? Sophia will handle it. Her reputation as reliable made her valuable, but also trapped her. Sophia found herself working late nights and weekends, carrying the workload of 2 employees while her own dreams, finishing graduate school, traveling, writing a book, remained on hold. When she finally asked for a promotion, her boss said, "You're great where you are. We can't afford to lose you in this role." Her constant yes had made her indispensable, but not in the way she hoped. Instead of recognition, she was rewarded with more work. Sophia's story highlights how overcommitment at work can stall careers, not advance them. The friend who disappeared into service. Karen was the kind of friend everyone called in a crisis. She helped people move, babysat kids, cooked meals, and stayed up late talking through heartbreaks. Everyone praised her generosity, but few noticed how rarely Karen talked about her own struggles. Over time, Karen grew resentful. She felt invisible, as if her only value was in what she could do for others. When she finally went through her own crisis, she realized she had no one to lean on. Her friends were so used to her role as helper that they didn't know how to support her in return. Karen's story shows the loneliness that can come from overcommitting. When you're always the giver, people may forget you need to receive too. The teacher who tried to save everyone. Mr. Alvarez was a high school teacher who cared deeply about his students. He stayed after class to tutor struggling kids, bought supplies out of his own pocket, and spent weekends mentoring. Parents praised him, students adored him, but the cost was heavy. He worked 12-hour days, neglected his own health, and rarely saw his family. After a health scare, he was forced to step back. The painful truth hit. By trying to save every student, he had nearly destroyed himself. His story reflects a common struggle among educators, the tension between boundless care and personal sustainability. Historical example: Mother Teresa. Even figures celebrated for selflessness wrestled with the cost of overcommitment. Mother Teresa dedicated her life to serving the poor, but private writings later revealed her inner struggles with exhaustion, loneliness, and spiritual dryness. Her legacy is inspiring, but her life also illustrates the toll of constant self-sacrifice. Even saints are not immune to burnout. Everyday cases we overlook. Beyond dramatic examples, overcommitment happens in subtle, everyday ways. The college student who agrees to every group project, leaving little time for their own studies. The volunteer who signs up for every committee, quietly resenting the lack of appreciation. The adult child who becomes the family fixer, solving every sibling dispute and parental crisis. These cases don't make headlines, but they shape countless lives marked by fatigue and frustration. Lessons from these stories. The stories point to several key lessons. Admiration can be dangerous. Praise for overcommitment often hides its cost. Saying yes to everything means saying no to yourself. Dreams and health slip away quietly. Unbalanced giving breeds resentment. Even the most generous hearts can grow bitter when never replenished. Boundaries are necessary for sustainability. Without them, even noble intentions collapse. A note of hope. Not every story of overcommitment ends in burnout. Some people learn to shift. Emily, the nurse, eventually returned to work with stricter boundaries, advocating for healthier schedules. David, the father, learned to say no to extra volunteering so he could be more present with his kids. Sophia, the employee, finally left her company for a role where her boundaries were respected. These shifts show that change is possible, but it often begins with hitting a wall. The challenge is to learn before collapse forces the lesson. Closing reflection. Stories remind us that overcommitting isn't just about generosity, it's about imbalance. It drains health, relationships, and joy. It silences personal needs and dreams. The world may admire the constant giver, but behind the applause is often a life stretched thin, aching for balance. The way forward isn't selfishness, it's sustainability. To keep giving, we must also receive. To help others, we must protect ourselves. In the next section, we'll explore practical lessons and habits that make this balance possible. How to care for others without abandoning yourself.